Chapter 210. Su Qingjun walked back to Fian Terrace from the mountain path in the early morning after daybreak. When she was about to walk towards her cave residence, she hesitated and glanced at the other side of Fian Terrace. The wooden house stood quietly in the morning light. Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment, but in the end, she still walked over. Just as she was about to knock on the door, she seemed to suddenly remember something. She looked at the sky, where the sun had yet to rise, and lowered her raised hand. She stood at the door for a moment and was about to turn around to leave when she suddenly heard a voice calling out to her from the cliff of Fian Terrace. Su Qingjun was startled and turned her head to look. She saw Lu Chen sitting with his back against the stone wall on the other side of the cliff, waving at her with a smile. Su Qingjun walked over and looked at Lu Chen with a trace of surprise. "Why are you here?" Lu Chen pointed at the vast sea of clouds below the cliff and said, "I suddenly thought of something last night. I've lived here for so long, and I've seen quite a few sunsets, but I've never seen a sunrise here." Su Qingjun sighed and looked at the sun that was about to rise on the horizon. She said, "What's so good about a sunrise?" Lu Chen glanced at her and said with a smile, "What's wrong? You don't seem to be in a good mood." Su Qingjun shook her head and wanted to say something but stopped. Then she suddenly saw a wet patch on Lu Chen's shoulder from the corner of her eye. She then saw that there was a drop of dew on the tip of his hair that was leaning against the stone wall. She couldn't help but be startled. She said, "What happened? You actually sat here all night?" Lu Chen followed her gaze and glanced at his shoulder. He then smiled and said, "Yes, I couldn't sleep last night and wanted to see the sunrise, so I just ran over. Do you want to come over and sit? The scenery here is very good." As he said this, he even patted the ground beside him. Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment, but in the end, she sat down beside him. The two of them sat side by side as the mountain breeze blew past. Under the morning light, they could see the white clouds rolling up and down like waves. A round red sun shone brightly in all directions. After a night of dormancy, it finally rose slowly. The golden light illuminated the heaven and earth. At that moment, the world seemed to be filled with dazzling light. Su Qingjun gazed into the distance with a look of pleasant surprise on her face. She said sincerely, "Ah, the sunrise is so beautiful." Lu Chen also gazed into the distance and said, "Yes. But you've lived here for so long, have you really never seen this scenery before?" Su Qingjun suddenly blushed. She retracted her gaze and glanced at him, saying, "No. Oh, sometimes, I wake up late." Lu Chen said seriously, "Sometimes?" Su Qingjun suddenly felt a little embarrassed. She glared at him and said, "Hey, in any case, I'm your master in name." "Even if it's in name," Lu Chen said with a smile, "so I can't say it?" Su Qingjun looked at him for a while and suddenly sighed, saying, "Forget it, say whatever you want. Anyway, all these years, you're the only one who would talk to me so casually. In fact, sometimes when I think about it, it doesn't seem to be a big deal." Lu Chen's eyes lit up. He said with a smile, "You really don't mind? Then I can tell others later. If you dare to say it, I'll break your legs." Su Qingjun grabbed his sleeve and said fiercely. Lu Chen laughed and nodded in agreement. Su Qingjun just pretended to be fierce, but then she also smiled and burst out laughing. She was as bright and beautiful as a spring flower. Then, she sighed softly and put her hands behind her head. She leaned against the stone wall and looked at the vast sea of clouds in the distance. She narrowed her eyes slightly and said to herself, "You're still smart. Sitting here and watching the sunrise, it's really leisurely and comfortable." Lu Chen smiled and turned to look at her. He said, "Is there something troubling at home again?" Su Qingjun closed her eyes and made a sound. After a while, she said softly, "My brother's head might not recover." Lu Chen frowned and said, "So serious?" Su Qingjun nodded and said, "My family has invited many highly skilled seniors to take a look, including my master. I also begged to go take a look, but there was no good way. Sumo is good and bad now. When he is good, he looks like a normal person, eating and sleeping by himself. But when he is bad, he is completely like a fool. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said in a low voice, "It sounds like his brain is hurt." Su Qingjun said, "Yes. That's why the seniors who came to take a look were also at a loss. They could only try to give him all the miraculous pills and medicines they could find, but it was of no use. Because of this, my father has lost a lot of weight. My mother is so anxious that her hair has turned white. She cries all day." Lu Chen did not know what to say for a moment. He did not have the slightest good impression of Sumo, whose brain was injured by the mind-manipulating art. But he always felt that the Su Qingjun in front of him was somewhat different. Looking at her somewhat depressed appearance, Lu Chen also felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. After a moment, Su Qingjun suddenly sneered and said, "Yesterday at the mountain gate, you should know about it, right?" Lu Chen slightly looked up at her, nodded and said, "I went over to take a look." Su Qingjun said, "That he Xixiang, is he very awe-inspiring?" Lu Chen said, "Very awe-inspiring." Su Qingjun indifferently said, now with a shake of his body, "He only went to kill a powerless evil sect spy and suddenly became the hero that sect leader Reverend and Dukanjinren strongly promoted. This kind of person, even if our Su family wants to take revenge, we won't dare to." Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, "Yes, you better bear with it." Su Qingjun stared blankly at that rising red sun. After a long while, she said, "Sometimes I really feel that it's quite boring." Lu Chen said, "What about those people who were harmed by your brother? Do they also feel that it's boring?" Su Qingjun was surprised. Her brows immediately frowned and turned to look at Lu Chen, her eyes somewhat gloomy. Lu Chen smiled and calmly said, "I'm sorry, I just don't know how to chat. Sometimes my words are just unpleasant to hear." Su Qingjun looked deeply at him and suddenly said, "I thought that at this time you will at least comfort me a few words, at least accompany me to talk, to make me happier." "Why?" Lu Chen looked at her beautiful face and said, "Is it because you think that because you are a natural beauty, a man should coax you, or because you think that because you have done me a great kindness, I should wholeheartedly flatter you, or have you forgotten that I was also harmed by that brother of yours?" Su Qingjun stared at him and slowly said, "You still hate him?" "Should I not hate him?" Lu Chen said. "Those torture tools hidden in the courtyard, I think you should know in your heart that I will not be the first person to experience those painful feelings." Su Qingjun slightly lowered her eyes, at that moment avoiding his gaze, and softly said, "I thought that if I treat you a bit better, you will slightly forget that hatred." "You are wrong," Lu Chen said calmly. Su Qingjun fell silent. After a while, she stood up and turned to walk down, but after 2 steps, she suddenly stopped and did not turn around. He only heard her say, "You have never spoken to me like this in the past. When I just arrived here, you asked me what was on my mind. In fact, I should be the one asking you, right?" Su Qingjun slowly turned around. There was a soft light in her bright eyes, looking at Lu Chen, and said, "What happened during the days I was not on the mountain, Lu Chen?" "Nothing." Lu Chen said, "It's just that I don't want to flatter you anymore. I feel that I have been very disgusting in thinking about you all day to make you happy." Su Qingjun's face looked a bit pale, and she whispered, "Why?" "No reason. In fact, the two of us do not have to be so hypocritical. Do we really pretend that we can always be friends? Are we not?" "Nope." Lu Chen's face seemed to become calmer and calmer, calmer to the point that it was close to indifference. Even his gaze was cold, the coldness in his eyes seeped into his bones. "I follow you, of course, because of your beautiful appearance, and also because of your profound skills. I can rely on you. In the future, I can rely on your name to get by and swindle food and drink. As for you, you probably feel a little guilty taking care of me, and also because I can make you happy, right?" Su Qingjun looked a bit sad, lightly shook her head, and said, "It's not like that." Lu Chen became a bit impatient, waved his hand at her, and said, "Anyway, that's what I think. Do you know how much I have suffered in the hands of that brother of yours? But every day when you come back, you only talk about his name. Hearing it makes my heart feel annoyed. I think, in the end, we are still two different people. Most likely we can't be friends. You are the #1 genius of the Kunlun party, Jean Dan Fryer. How can you really look up to a good-for-nothing odd-job disciple like me? Su Qingjun suddenly raised her head, and said, I did not, after a long time. Can you guarantee that you definitely won't? Su Qingjun was suddenly at a loss for words. Lu Chen stood up, took one last look at that red sun at the end of the sea of clouds, sighed, and then walked towards the wooden house at the bottom of the cliff. When he passed by Su Qingjun, he paused for a moment, and said, I don't want to stay here anymore. I will go down the mountain today. I don't want to trouble you in the future. Can I ask you to cancel the title of Master in Name? Su Qingjun nodded blankly, her expression complicated, lightly gritting her teeth. She watched as Lu Chen returned to the wooden house, and not long after, he came out with a small package, and then walked with large strides towards the mountain path. He didn't say anything, didn't say goodbye, looked like he was going to directly go far away like this. Looking at that man's back, Su Qingjun suddenly shouted loudly, and said, I didn't look down on you. I have always treated you as a friend. The footsteps of the person going down the mountain paused for a moment, but in the end he still didn't turn back. He only stretched out a hand and waved in the wind, as if bidding farewell to the past period of time, and then he walked with large strides down this hill. Chapter 2:11. The path down the mountain was not easy to walk on. Zigzagging, it was as if he was always walking on a steep slope with no flat ground. There was no one on the nearby mountain path, and the flying goose platform was usually quiet. Lu Chen walked alone for a long time. After leaving the flying goose platform, he walked around casually, as if he did not have a clear and definite direction to go. He was like a cold and lonely shadow, walking in the mountains until a deep voice suddenly rang in his ear and said gently, Where are you going? Lu Chen stopped and said, I'm waiting for you. The person seemed to smile. Then, he heard the sound of the wind and the rustling of the trees on both sides of the mountain path. The light from the sky seemed to be twisted for a moment, refracting a strange rainbow in front of him. A huge and burly figure appeared behind Lu Chen. In the next moment, the two of them had already left the mountain path and arrived at a quiet neighboring forest. Lu Chen stood in the forest and looked around. He mumbled something, but no one knew what he was saying. Then, he looked up at the opposite side and said, Damn Baldy, do you have wine? Whoosh! A wine gourd was thrown over in midair. Lu Chen caught it, pulled out the cork, and gulped it down. Then, he wiped his mouth and lamented, What kind of lousy wine is this? You're a divine transformation stage true lord after all. Can't you get some immortal wine that can extend your life by 10 years? Get lost. True Lord Tianlan, who looked taller than Lu Chen even though he was sitting in the forest, spat at him. Then, with a wave of his hand, the wine gourd flew back and landed in his hand. True Lord Tianlan touched the wine gourd and seemed to cherish it. He said, There's no such thing in the world. Besides, you're the only one in the world who can drink my wine. Be content. Lu Chen did not look proud or honored at all. He snorted and found a place in front of Perfected Lord Tianlan to sit down. Perfected Lord Tianlan glanced at him and the corners of his lips curled up into a strange smile. You suddenly fell out with Su Qingjun and went down the mountain. Isn't that a little strange? Lu Chen said lightly, I don't like the entire Su family, okay? Perfected Lord Tianlan replied, Sure, of course. Let's not talk about how angry you are right now. In the future, when I'm done with all those trivial matters, I'll definitely help you torture the Su family and help you vent your anger, okay? Lu Chen shook his head and said, I will take revenge myself. You don't have to worry about my business. Perfected Lord Tianlan sighed. Nonsense. Are you afraid that I'll go to Soaring Goose platform? Lu Chen fell silent for a moment before replying, You're going to look for me sooner or later anyway. Once I'm involved in a bunch of trivial matters, I won't be able to get out of it. There's no need for me to harm others. Perfected Lord Tianlan could not help but laugh. Seems like you don't trust me. Also, this is the first time I've seen you feeling compassion for someone. Why? You've fallen for that lady? Lu Chen shook his head. It's not that. Initially, I wanted to go to Soaring Goose platform to find the traitor. However, that person doesn't look like one and she's passable, so I let it go. In any case, the truth will be revealed in 3 days. Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at him and his expression gradually turned solemn. Are you so sure? Lu Chen replied, that pattern is the highest level of the demonic cult in the 3 realms. It can't be faked unless it's someone like me who has been in the demonic cult for many years. Perfected Lord Tianlan didn't question him any further. He nodded and said, all right. Then, he smiled and said, I didn't sneak back all the way here in vain. Lu Chen raised his head and looked at him. Sneak? Perfected Lord Tianlan chuckled. That's right. Right now, not many people in the Kunlun party know that I'm back. Don't go out and spread it. Lu Chen replied, even if I say it, someone has to believe me. Even if I run to the mountain gate and shout that the damn fatty is back, not only will they not believe me, they might even beat me up. Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed out loud. See, this is the benefit of having many disciples and grand disciples. Lu Chen scoffed. What disciples and grand disciples do you have? You don't even have a single disciple, right? Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled. Isn't it just you? Lu Chen turned his head away and did not look at him. He asked, if the traitor is indeed lured out to meet me on the night of the full moon, what should I do then? Perfected Lord Tianlan replied without hesitation, capture him, of course. Lu Chen asked, who's going to do it? Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled. Isn't that why I rushed back? Don't worry, I'll hide near you. Once the traitor appears, I'll naturally take him down. Lu Chen stared at him for a while. That's it? Unless he doesn't come. Perfected Lord Tianlan shrugged. Leaves fell from the forest and landed between Perfected Lord Tianlan and Lu Chen. Lu Chen looked at the half-withered leaves. After a while, he suddenly said, I have something to ask you. Yes, old Ma has mentioned this to me before. Go ahead and ask. Lu Chen looked up at Perfected Lord Tianlan's eyes. Why are the people of the fiend cult like us? They don't seem to know about the traitor that's hidden the deepest in Kunlun Mountain. I don't know. Lu Chen's expression darkened. What do you mean by that? Perfected Lord Tianlan said, I really don't know. I'm not a shadow that stays in the fiend cult all day long like you. I'm indeed not too clear about the internal affairs of the fiend cult over the years. I understand what you mean. However, don't forget that I'm a soul formation perfected lord, not a fraud. There are many things that I'm not omniscient about. Lu Chen looked at him quietly and said, I think it's a little strange. Perfected Lord Tianlan's eyes fell on his face for a moment. Then, he smiled and said, so, you secretly tracked down the second spy of the fiend cult and then revealed the identity of that person to Idle Month through Old Ma? Lu Chen said lightly, that guy is an idiot. He doesn't care about hiding at all. Not to mention me, even an experienced person in Fuyunji can find him directly. Perfected Lord Tianlan grinned and said, so that person is dead. Lu Chen looked down. After a moment of silence, he nodded and said, good. All the people of the fiend cult should be killed. He looked sincere and said to Tianlan. You did really well this time, Perfected Lord Tianlan said. I didn't misjudge you. You're the only one in the world who can find such a well-hidden spy of the fiend cult. Lu Chen said, but I haven't caught him yet. Perfected Lord Tianlan paused and said with a smile, it'll be soon. It'll only take a few days. Oh. Lu Chen thought for a while and suddenly asked him, but I killed a servant disciple of the Kunlun party this time. Don't you blame me for killing good people? Perfected Lord Tianlan said, do you think that he Changxing is a good person? Lu Chen wanted to say something but stopped. After thinking for a while, he shook his head and said, I'm not sure. Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and said, I don't blame you because I trust you. He said with some emotion, back then, when you sneaked into the devil cult alone, it was a real dragon's pool and tiger's den. Under those circumstances, I could trust you for many years. Today, on this Mount Kunlun, why wouldn't I trust you? Lu Chen nodded. After a while, he said, okay. On the night of the full moon, I'll wait for you in the dense forest at the foot of the mountain. Lu Chen said. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded and said, don't worry about me. Just go there by yourself. I'll hide in the dark and show up to catch the spy when necessary. Lu Chen frowned and said, don't tell the other people of the Kunlun party. For example, Immortal Idol Month, the head of the sect? Perfected Lord Tianlan shook his head and said, not for now, in case there are too many people talking, right? Lu Chen nodded slowly. After pondering for a moment, he said, what if we find out that the spy is an important figure in the Kunlun party? Perfected Lord Tianlan said, isn't that even better? It means that we've caught a big fish and we're not afraid of anyone. Lu Chen said, even if it's perfected Yuanying? Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and said, what perfected Yuanying can compare to me? Don't worry, I'll catch one for you when the time comes. What about someone more powerful? Lu Chen asked. Perfected Lord Tianlan frowned and said, what do you mean? Lu Chen said, can you catch someone more powerful than perfected Yuanying? Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression turned serious for the first time. He looked at Lu Chen and said, you mean my senior brother Bai Chen? Lu Chen said indifferently, can you catch a soul formation perfected lord for me as well? Perfected Lord Tianlan suddenly laughed and shook his head. Do you have any proof? Lu Chen said, no, I'm just talking nonsense. Let's see how you're going to answer me. That's impossible. Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and said, as a soul formation perfected lord of the Kunlun party, he has nothing. How can he be an elder of the fiend cult who is like a stray dog? Do you think he's stupid? Lu Chen looked at him for a while and nodded. You're right. It can't be Hakushin Jinkuan. Is there anything else? If not, I'm leaving, perfected Lord Tianlan said to Lu Chen, we've said everything that needs to be said. Can I really turn over a new leaf after I catch that fiend cult spy? Lu Chen asked. Of course, perfected Lord Tianlan said with certainty. Lu Chen nodded and said, then let me ask you for one more thing. Say it. Collect the corpse of that fiend cult spy at the foot of the mountain. Otherwise, if one day his head is separated from his body and his corpse is exposed on the streets, it will look a little tragic. Perfected Lord Tianlan frowned and looked at Lu Chen. Are you pleading for that fiend cult spy? Yes, Lu Chen replied calmly. Perfected Lord Tianlan was silent for a moment and said, didn't you secretly find this person? I want to collect his corpse, can I? Lu Chen asked again as if he did not hear perfected Lord Tianlan's words and did not seem to care about perfected Lord Tianlan's gradually darkening expression. Chapter 212. No, perfected Lord Tianlan said. Don't be meddlesome. Lu Chen quieted down. After a while, he nodded without saying anything. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him and frowned. Ma Xiaoyun is right. You do seem to be a little off lately. Because I want to collect that person's corpse. Because your heart softened. Perfected Lord Tianlan said, 10 years ago, you weren't soft-hearted or hesitant. You didn't care about other people's feelings or worry about dragging them down. I think I told you a long time ago that shadows like you don't live long. Lu Chen was silent. After a while, he said, you're right. I've probably changed in the past 10 years. Why? You don't like it? Perfected Lord Tianlan said, of course I don't like it because you might lose your life. But I think it's all right. Lu Chen said calmly, although my heart softened and my cultivation was crippled, I saw things that I never saw before and felt a state of mind that I never knew before. I think it's all good. Lu Chen looked up at the famous perfected lord in front of him and said, "Actually, sometimes I also wonder if I would still stab Yun Shouyang to death without hesitation if I was in that desolate valley now." Perfected Lord Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at Lu Chen. "Why? Do you think what you did 10 years ago was wrong?" Lu Chen shook his head. "No, I don't regret it." After a pause, he said, "You're right. I was probably soft-hearted. A shadow shouldn't be soft-hearted. I think I'm not suitable to be a shadow anymore." The forest quieted down. After a while, Perfected Lord Tianlan said, "It's been hard on you all these years. Fortunately, you'll be free after this matter is done." Lu Chen smiled. "Really?" Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed. "Why would I lie to you? You're my only disciple and I'm counting on you to inherit my legacy in the future. Oh, speaking of this, my lineage has a habit. Every generation's patriarch will pass on one of his Daoist titles to his favorite disciple, which will then be passed down from generation to generation. My master is old ancestor Tian Hong. He imparted the Daoist name, Tian, to me, so I'm called Tian Lan. In the future, I will also pass on the word Tian to you, Lu Chen," Perfected Lord Tianlan said to Lu Chen with a smile. Lu Chen shrugged and said, "Then what should I be called, Lu Tian? Tian Chen? Lu Tian Chen? It doesn't sound imposing at all. It doesn't sound good." Perfected Lord Tianlan thought for a moment and said, "How about Heavenly Shadow? Sky Shadow?" Lu Chen repeated. Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled. "How is it?" "I think it's pretty good." "Forget it, don't talk to me about this. Otherwise, I'll be entangled with a shadow for the rest of my life." "Damn Baldy, let's make a deal. This is the last time." Lu Chen said to Perfected Lord Tianlan with a smile. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded. "Yes, it's the last time. But this name is really not bad. Think about it again, haha." Amidst the laughter, he stood up. His wide sleeves fluttered like floating clouds. A strong gust of wind blew and the fallen leaves danced in the air. The entire forest rustled. Suddenly, birds flew up in alarm. His figure flashed and disappeared without a trace. In the depths of the forest, only Lu Chen was left. He looked at the strong gale and his expression suddenly turned strange, as though he was thinking about something. After a while, he muttered to himself, "Old ancestor Tian Hong's favorite disciple didn't take over the Kunlun party," amidst the clouds in the sky, on the winter peak. Amidst the howling wind and snow, White Lotus and Zhuoxian stood in front of the wind speech disc that had been opened once again. They looked at the violent wind and snow inside and then heard Hakushin Jinkuan's voice from the depths of the wind and snow. "Lian, leave the wind speech disc with your second senior brother for the next few days. There are many important matters of the sect that require him to contact me from time to time. You're still young, so don't be distracted. Just focus on cultivating in the cave abode." White Lotus lowered her head slightly and said calmly, "Yes, I understand. Go. I'll take my leave." White Lotus bowed to the wind speech disc and then nodded at Zhuoxian. Zhuoxian smiled and then White Lotus turned and walked out. Zhuoxian was the only one left in the cave abode. After a while, Hakushin Jinkuan's voice was heard again. "How's Lian's cultivation recently?" Zhuoxian said, "Junior sister is a genius. Her cultivation progress is extremely fast and has long surpassed me when I was her age. I'm really ashamed of my inferiority." Hakushin Jinkuan's voice sounded like he was in a good mood. He even smiled and said, "Yes, Lian was born with 5 pillars of bone. Her cultivation is indeed better than ordinary people. But she's still young and has a long road ahead of her. As her senior brother, you have to take care of her from time to time." Zhuoxian cupped his hands and said, "Yes, I understand." Hakushin Jinkuan asked again, "How's the situation in the sect?" Zhuoxian said, "Everything is fine now. The day before yesterday, Senior Brother Idle Month resolutely ordered the execution of the devil cult spies. His thunderous measures deterred everyone. Those rumors have decreased a lot these days. Hakushin Jinkuan sneered and said, those troublemakers are just people who look fierce but are weak inside. Even if they cultivate to yuanying, they won't be able to achieve anything big. Now the only one the sect has to worry about is my junior brother Tianlan. As long as he doesn't return to the mountain, there won't be any big trouble. Zhuo Xian's eyes flashed. He lowered his voice and said, Master, do you mean that martial uncle Tianlan is dissatisfied with eldest senior brother? The person he's dissatisfied with is probably me. Hakushin Jinkuan seemed to be in a good mood today. He did not hide anything from his second disciple and said lightly, but it doesn't matter. As long as I'm here, he can't do anything. Zhuo Xian bowed his head deeply and said respectfully, Master is wise. I'll meditate and practice. But since I promised idle month, I'll still go to the sect council on his behalf that night. You can come to me then. Yes. The sound of the wind and snow gradually subsided and gradually disappeared. The wind's speech plate also quieted down and returned to its usual quiet appearance. Zhuo Xian walked forward and gently put away the magic treasure. He seemed to be in deep thought. This night, when the moon rose, a figure swept from the night sky and landed on Fian platform. The moonlight shone coldly on the left and right, and the platform looked empty. The man was about to go to the cave residence on the mountain wall to call the door when he suddenly exclaimed and turned to look at the other side. He saw a woman not far away from the wooden house. It was Su Qingjun. She was standing there looking up at the moon, lost in thought. The man walked over and deliberately increased his pace. Su Qingjun immediately felt the movement behind her. She turned her head and was stunned at first. Then she called out, Master, why are you here? The man was Masato Kihara, the leader of the Kunlun party. He walked to Su Qingjun and looked around. Finally, his eyes fell on Su Qingjun's face. He said with some surprise, What are you doing here? Su Qingjun said, Tonight's night is not bad. The moonlight shone on the sea of clouds. It is quite magnificent. I wanted to come over and take a look. Masato Kihara rolled his eyes and said, You have lived here for a few years. You should be tired of it. Su Qingjun was silent for a moment and said, No. I was immersed in cultivation for the past few years. After I came back, I often hid in the cave residence. If no one told me about the surrounding scenery, the sun rising and the moon setting, the sea of clouds and so on, I really did not look at it seriously. Masato Kihara looked at the sea of clouds in the distance. Under the moonlight, the sea of clouds shimmered with silver light. It was like the waves of the sea. It was very beautiful. He nodded and said, Yes, we cultivators sometimes need to understand the nature of heaven and earth. Although this state can only be understood by cultivators above the realm of yuanying, but for a genius with extraordinary talent like you, it is beneficial for your cultivation to understand more in the realm of Jin Dan. Su Qingjun nodded and said, Yes, disciple understands. She looked at Masato Kihara and said, Master, you came here tonight. Is there something you need me for? Masato Kihara did not look at the sea of clouds. After a moment of hesitation, he said to Su Qingjun, Yes, tonight I went to see an old friend. I passed by here on my way back to the mountain. I wanted to come down to see you and have a chat with you. Su Qingjun nodded and said, Oh. Master, please wait for a moment. I will go get some spiritual tea. We can enjoy the moonlight together. Masato Kihara waved her hand and said, I don't want to drink. The taste of the tea is too bland. I will drink my own wine. As he spoke, he took out a flask of wine out of nowhere and stuffed it into his mouth before gulping down a few mouthfuls. Su Qingjun couldn't help but laugh. She shook her head and said nothing. Masato Kihara drank the wine and let out a satisfied sigh. Qingjun, you have been my disciple for so many years. Do you have any regrets? Regret? Su Qingjun was taken aback. She said in astonishment, Master, why would you say that? I have never regretted it. It is all thanks to your guidance that I can improve day by day. How could I have any other thoughts? Masato Kihara smiled and said, Yes, you are a good child. As he spoke, he drank another mouthful of wine and continued, But I think you know what's going on in our Kunlun sect. Our Taiji has been declining for many years, and there are still many areas where we suffer losses. Although I've tried my best to help you fight for it, sometimes it's inevitable that there will be times when we can't do it well. I'm afraid that you'll be wronged because of your talent. Su Qingjun smiled and said, Master, you think too much. I am very good. Masato Kihara stared at Su Qingjun's beautiful face and suddenly smiled. He said, Yes, you are really a good child. But don't worry, there will be a day in the future when Master will properly train you and let you be like all the other geniuses in the sect. You will be able to display your strengths and make our Tetsu branch flourish. As he spoke, he seemed to be a little excited. He unconsciously exerted force in his hand and directly crushed the wine bottle with a muffled sound. The wine splashed out. Under the moonlight, the countless water droplets in the air refracted a magnificent and strange rainbow, as if leading to the distant depths of the night. Chapter 213. In the dead of night, the bright moon hung high in the sky. Outside Kunwa City, in a nameless mountain forest. Hurried screams and desperate running mixed together, piercing through the silence of the mountain forest, creating ripples in the darkness like water. A black shadow rushed out of the forest. It was a huge black bear. Under the moonlight, one could see that the fur on its body, chest, and back was already covered with a hard, plate-like skin. It was very different from ordinary bears. Obviously, it was a ferocious beast that had already advanced to become a demonic beast. Demonic beasts like this might not be considered high in rank, but their fighting strength couldn't be underestimated. Their strength was often several times greater than that of ordinary beasts, and their temperaments were even more ferocious, making them very difficult to provoke. In an ordinary mountain forest, this kind of demonic beast was enough to occupy a mountain or a forest, becoming the king of beasts in this area. But in this dark night, this black bear demonic beast looked somewhat panicked. There was fear in its eyes as it ran forward with all its might. It seemed as if it wished it could grow wings and fly as fast as possible, leaving this dark mountain forest as quickly as possible. While this demonic beast was madly running away, the moonlit mountain forest was cold and silent. Not a single sound dared to be heard. All the beasts, including the birds, seemed to be doing their best to hide their auras, not daring to make any sound. Suddenly, the moonlight shining on the horizon darkened and a cold wind blew in the darkness of the night. A strange aura blew from the depths of the forest to the left of this black bear demonic beast. The black bear roared, but the sound of the wind suddenly became fierce. Like a thunderclap, a black shadow blocked the moonlight in the sky and covered the black bear's shadow. Roar! The black bear let out a crazy and desperate roar. Its huge body was knocked to the ground by the sudden force. It raised its huge bare paw and smashed it down, but the black shadow advanced and retreated like lightning, dodging the paw in an instant. Then, it suddenly approached. In the darkness, a cold light shone, sharp fangs as bright as frost. A dim light flickered in those dark eyes, and a green flame was burning. The black bear's roar came to an abrupt end. All sounds seemed to be blocked in its throat and were drowned out by the gushing blood. Its huge body struggled frantically, but no matter how hard it tried, it could not break free from those terrifying sharp teeth and the ghostly black shadow. Gradually, the demonic beast's body softened. Life flowed out of its strong body like water, like a fountain of blood being drunk dry. The jade-green flames burned in that lonely eye, and the darkness seemed to be roaring faintly. The forest was silent, and everything gradually quieted down. A black shadow slowly walked out of the darkness. It was a black dog whose body had expanded a lot. Its strong and bulging muscles seemed to contain infinite power. When blood dripped from its sharp teeth, it didn't seem to notice. Moonlight sprinkled down from the sky once again, landing on this mountain peak. All the beasts and birds were silent. Only a black dog raised its head and stared at the round moon that was getting fuller and fuller. Suddenly, it opened its mouth and let out a mournful howl towards the bright moon in the sky. Wu, is there something wrong with your brain? In Kunwa City's Black Hill Pavilion, Old Ma angrily pointed at Lu Chen and scolded, "Do you think you're still a 17 or 18-year-old boy? Don't you use your brain when you do things? How dare you say that to a true sovereign?" Lu Chen expressionlessly sat across from him. He just shook his head and didn't respond. Old Ma looked at him and became angrier. He even seemed to be trembling with anger. He said, "I really don't understand what you're thinking now. Let's not talk about the past. I think even 10 years ago, you were much smarter than you are now. You knew what to do and what to say. You knew when to keep your mouth shut and swallow those damn words until you die." Old Ma was even more furious when he saw Zhou Donghuang's expression. Lu Chen wiped his face and sighed. He said, "Can you speak properly? Your saliva sprayed on my face." "Bah!" Old Ma said angrily, "I wish I could pour a basin of water on your head." Lu Chen smiled and said, "Well, I'm fine now, aren't I?" Old Ma said coldly, "This is because true sovereign cherishes old friendships. I've told you long ago that he treats you differently. In his heart, you're different from the others. Based on the nonsense you spouted and that damn corpse collection, believe it or not, anyone else would have killed you on the spot to avoid future troubles." Lu Chen slightly lowered his head. After a moment of silence, he said, "Do you really think so?" "Yes." Old Ma said flatly, "I know you're suspicious, but it's not your fault. You've been a shadow for so many years. Back then, in the devil cult, you were tense day and night and couldn't sleep at night. For more than 10 years, you were tormented by life and death every day. To be honest, I admire you for not going crazy. But you can't be like this." Old Ma became agitated. He suddenly walked up and grabbed Lu Chen's clothes, roared at him, and then gritted his teeth and said, "Lu Chen, listen, you can doubt everyone in this world, and you can even doubt me, but you really can't doubt true sovereign, do you understand?" Lu Chen didn't resist Old Ma's action. He just frowned slightly, looked at Old Ma and said, "Why?" Old Ma took a deep breath, as if to calm himself down, and then slowly let go of Lu Chen's clothes. His eyes gradually softened. After a moment, he suddenly smiled bitterly and said, "For so many years, he raised you, cultivated you, and everything you did was for him. If you really doubt him, then what is the first half of your life? Nothing? Or a dream?" Old Ma stared at him and said softly. Lu Chen was silent. Old Ma paced back and forth a few steps in front of him, and then walked to the door. Looking at the deserted alley outside the house, he said, "And speaking of which, what need does true sovereign have to harm you? What can you threaten him with? In terms of strength, he is a deity stage true sovereign. Compared to you, this kind of trash, the difference is like heaven and earth. In terms of reputation, his name shakes the world, you are unknown. In terms of secrets, what you helped him do was to deal with the evil sect. But his reputation of being the most effective in dealing with the evil sect has long been known by the world. So I really can't think of any reason why he would harm you, and why is it worth your suspicion?" Lu Chen was silent for a long time. Then he smiled bitterly and said, "So you're saying, I was too suspicious and blamed him wrongly?" "Yes." Old Ma nodded, then stared at Lu Chen, his expression solemn, and said, "Brother, listen to me, don't let your imagination run wild, don't go the wrong way. Just follow true sovereign, and you will naturally have a bright future." That day, when he left the Black Hill Pavilion and walked out of that deep alley, the sun shone from behind him. Lu Chen saw the shadow on the ground in front of him. He stopped, somewhat in a daze. He took a step, and the shadow moved. He took a step, and the shadow moved again. He looked to the side and found that there was a shady place under the high wall where the sun could not reach. He walked over and stood under the wall. The sun could not shine on him. He looked at his feet. The shadow was gone. Lu Chen looked silently. After a long time, he stepped forward and walked out of the alley. Heavenly Soldier Hall of Kunlun Mountain. When he walked all the way, the Kunlun disciples along the way were very respectful to him. He had cultivated to the Jin Dan realm at a young age and was recognized as one of the most outstanding geniuses in the sect. Not to mention that he had a promising future, he was also nurtured and cared for by the head of the Heavenly Soldier Hall, Dukanjinren. Even the head of the sect, Immortal Idol Month, valued him very much. Such a talent was really worthy of the 4 words, God's favored one. However, he had never been arrogant. On the contrary, after he broke through to the Jin Dan realm, his temperament and self-restraint seemed to have gone up another level. He treated people with courtesy. Whether it was ordinary disciples or odd-job disciples, he treated them equally. The way he talked and handled things made people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. At the same time, he was even more respected. His reputation in the sect was rising day by day. When Dukanjinren saw his favorite disciple walk in, he could not help but smile. No matter who it was, even if he was a famous Yuanyingjinren for many years, to have such a satisfactory disciple was the most satisfying thing for him. Why did you come today? What's the matter? Dukanjinren asked He with a smile. He respectfully bowed to his master as usual before he spoke. Dao Master Dukong laughed and helped him up. Then, he said, there are no outsiders here. So, you don't need to be so polite. He straightened his body, smiled and said, it's what I should do. After speaking, he straightened his expression and said to Dukanjinren, Master, I really have something that I need to report to you. And, say it. He took out a piece of cloth from his bosom and passed it to Dukanjinren. Dukanjinren unfolded it. It was a rubbing of a pattern. The pattern was twisted and complicated. It looked vaguely familiar. He could not help but was stunned. What is this? He said, ever since I caught that evil faction spy, disciple was inspired. I once again carefully investigated the first case of He Xianxia's murder. Finally by chance, I found this pattern. Dukanjinren's spirit was roused. What does this pattern mean? Do you know? He said, disciple is very familiar with the evil faction's secret language. I can tell that the meaning of this secret pattern is, on the night of the full moon, we will meet at the same place. Dukanjinren suddenly stood up. Really? He nodded and said, that's true. And this secret pattern is much more brilliant than the one used by the evil faction spy. In addition to the reincarnation formation that appeared, it must be an important person from the evil faction lurking in our Kunlun party. Dukanjinren beamed with joy. He patted He's shoulder hard. You are indeed my good disciple. You will have a great merit. He smiled. Actually, disciple came here this time to report to master. With my meager skills, I'm afraid I may not be able to accomplish such a big thing. Perhaps if we really have to capture this person, master will have to do it yourself. Therefore, the one who deserves the greatest credit should be you, master. Dukanjinren was shocked. Me? He nodded his head. It has to be you. Chapter 214. There were only 2 days left until the night of the full moon. That morning, the sky was gloomy. Dark clouds gathered above the Kunlun mountain range, and soon, it began to rain. From a distance, the entire Kunlun mountain range was hidden in the gray rain, faintly discernible. The air in the mountain became humid, and transparent pearl-like water droplets dripped down from the eaves, forming a crystal-clear curtain of water. Under the eaves, the window was half open, and a gentle breeze blew past, carrying a layer of rain powder into the house, swirling and spreading, then dissipating in the warm air here. The faint fragrance of tea spread from a wisp of smoke curling up from the table in the house, refreshing the mind, as if one could already feel the sweetness before drinking it. There were 2 people at the table, a white-haired man and a woman, sitting opposite each other, sipping tea. Melaleuca japonica carried a small and exquisite teapot, pouring a cup of tea into the teacup of the person opposite her, then smiled and said, "This is the tea from your precious disciple's house. What do you think?" The man opposite her was naturally the one who had accepted Xian as his disciple, Dongfang Tao, who had recently broken through to become a Yuanying spiritual master. He picked up the teacup and smelled it, nodded slightly, then took a sip, exclaiming, "Good tea." Melaleuca japonica smiled and said, "Stop pretending, don't think that I don't know you didn't drink tea before, and now you know what good tea is? It's for the sake of your disciple, isn't it?" Dongfang Tao chuckled, put down the teacup, and looked at Melaleuca japonica and said, "I can't hide anything from you. But to be honest, I've been in seclusion these days, unable to take care of Xian, and it's all thanks to you taking care of her outside, thank you very much." Melaleuca japonica waved her hand and said, "It's just a small matter, and speaking of it, I've also been negligent, causing that girl Xian to suffer so much. Even now, I still feel bad thinking about it." Dongfang Tao went silent for a moment before he shook his head and said, "That matter is already in the past, and it's not your fault. There's no need to bring it up again. Moreover, I heard a few days ago that he gangs suddenly died in Kunwa City. This can be considered as retribution for evil." Melaleuca japonica lightly nodded her head and said, "At least Xian is a broad-minded child. After suffering so much, if it was any other girl of her age, I'm afraid they wouldn't be able to bear it. However, she actually managed to pull through after the incident. Now, it looks like she has almost forgotten about those things. It's really rare." Dongfang Tao smiled faintly and said, "Just take it as a form of tempering for her temperament. As long as it's beneficial to her cultivation in the future, then it wouldn't have been in vain." Melaleuca japonica nodded in agreement. In the life of a cultivator, the most important thing was naturally the cultivation of one's own cultivation. What Dongfang Tao said was actually the common view of many cultivators. She picked up the teapot and once again added water boiled from the spiritual spring in the mountain. For a moment, a fragrant aroma filled the air. Coupled with the soft sound of rain outside and the sound of water dripping, the room seemed especially elegant. "When Xian brings people over later, you should at least give her some face and be a bit more polite to that Su Qingjun," Melaleuca japonica said as she poured tea for Dongfang Tao. A hint of helplessness appeared on Dongfang Tao's face as he said, "That girl only knows how to make trouble for me all day long. The sect council meeting is in 2 days, and I've just ascended to Yuanying. It's the time to make friends with fellow cultivators in the same realm as me in the sect. But she's really good. She's been begging me for half a day, insisting that I go and treat someone." Melaleuca japonica smiled and said, "Xian is a kind-hearted child. She's good friends with that Su Qingjun, and they even address each other as sisters. This time, I heard that the Su family is really at their wits' end. They've begged everywhere, but to no avail. Su Qingjun's younger brother is probably in a desperate situation. She's begging to come over and let you see if there'll be any pleasant surprises." Dongfang Tao snorted and said, "I'm not one of your Bai Chao Tang people. I can't treat people." Melaleuca japonica scolded him with a smile and said, "Don't talk nonsense. In any case, you're already here today. You should at least see her. Moreover, I've seen that girl Su Qingjun a few times. She's well educated and has outstanding talent. Especially now that she's only 22 years old, she's already cultivated the Jin Dan. This achievement is much better than when we were young. I'm afraid she'll be an amazing genius in the future. Your disciple will also benefit in the future if he's on good terms with her. Old man, don't be unreasonable here. Just think of it as paving the way for your good disciple." Dongfang Tao rolled his eyes. Although he was now a spiritual master of Yuanying, he was very casual in front of Melaleuca japonica. Obviously, the two of them had a very close relationship. Even if Melaleuca japonica scolded him with a smile, he didn't care at all. He just shrugged and agreed. Halfway up the mountain, far away from the tea room, a group of people were walking over in the rain. The two people in front were young women holding umbrellas. They were Xian and Su Qingjun. Behind them, there were several servants carrying a sedan chair. The curtain of the sedan chair hung down, making it impossible to see the situation inside. However, one could vaguely see the figure of a man sitting inside. The rain floated down, hitting the cloth of the umbrella with a low sound. Sparkling and translucent water droplets continuously slid down from the umbrella. The woman under the umbrella stared ahead, looking at the misty mountain rain. White mist curled up among the green mountains and trees. The world was hazy. Her face was slightly pale, and there was a trace of tiredness between her eyebrows. When the breeze and drizzle brushed past her temples, it seemed to add a trace of sorrowful beauty. "Sister Sue, don't worry too much." Xian's voice came from the side. Su Qingjun made a sound of agreement, smiled at her, and nodded. "This time, I really have to thank you, Sister Xian." Su Qingjun said, "If you hadn't begged, I'm afraid that Martial Uncle Dongfang might not have been willing to take the time to look at Sumo's situation. This is a small matter. Don't take it to heart." Xian shook her hand and said with a smile, "On the other hand, my master's temper is very difficult. I've already told him to go down the mountain to visit your Su family, but he refused to go and insisted on staying on this mountain. He even had to trouble you to bring people over. He's really pissed me off." It's fine. Su Qingjun hurriedly said, "As long as Martial Uncle Dongfang is willing to help take a look at Sumo, we should go up the mountain. There's no reason for him to move." "Sister, you can't say that." Xian pouted and complained. It seemed that she was still somewhat dissatisfied with her master. However, she quickly turned to something else and moved closer to Su Qingjun. She lowered her voice and said, "Sister Su, these troubles are actually nothing. It's fine as long as he can be cured. But I'm afraid that if..." Su Qingjun sighed, but her expression didn't change at all. She only smiled bitterly and said, "Sister, you should know about my current situation. I've invited quite a few seniors of the sect to take a look, but none of them can do anything. Today, I've asked to see Martial Uncle Dongfang, but it's actually a desperate attempt. I'm just holding on to a sliver of hope. If there's really no way to cure him, then it's Sumo's fate. I can't ask for anything more. Let him be." Xian nodded. There was a hint of sympathy in her eyes. She turned around and saw the shadow of a house in front of her. She hurriedly said, "It's right in front. We'll be there soon." Su Qingjun looked at the house that had appeared in front of her. The scene that she had seen that day when she and Lu Chen had gone to the martyr's grave together suddenly appeared before her eyes. In the dark and mysterious courtyard of the martyr's grave, Dongfang Tao and the corpse watcher had engaged in a short but intense battle. Sumo's mind had been damaged, sometimes good, sometimes bad. The root cause of everything had clearly started from that martyr's grave. However, due to the current situation, the Su family could not pursue the matter further. It was just that when she had searched everywhere for experts to treat her to no avail and everyone in the family had almost given up all hope, Su Qingjun thought of Dongfang Tao. Although she didn't know much about this newly ascended nascent soul Daoist master, from what she had seen that day, Dongfang Tao seemed to have some unknown relationship with that grave and that mysterious corpse watcher. Perhaps, a miracle would happen if she came to his place? Su Qingjun did not know. She could only come here with this last bit of hope. At home, her father was haggard and her mother was sad. Right now, she could only rely on herself. However, at this time, she did not know why. In this clear and cold misty rain that was falling from the mountains, as she walked in the pitter-patter of rain with an umbrella, she suddenly thought of Lu Chen. That morning, he had still been by her side as they walked together to that dark martyr's grave. Now that she thought about it, although she was worried at that time, perhaps there was still some inadvertent warmth in her heart. Where is he now? The group walked out of the tea room. Xian and Su Qingjun closed their umbrellas and walked to the door. Xian knocked on the door. A moment later, a creaking sound was heard. The two doors opened by themselves. A voice came from inside the room. "Come in." The two walked in. The room was decorated simply and elegantly. In the middle of the room, there was a tea table. Two people were sitting there. It was Dongfang Tao and Melaleuca japonica. Su Qingjun bowed respectfully. Disciple Su Qingjun pays respect to Dongfang Shishu. Melaleuca japonica Shishu. Apologies for disturbing you today. Dongfang Tao did not say anything. Melaleuca japonica smiled and said, "Get up. We are all so familiar with each other. There is no need to be so polite. Come and sit." Xian, who was at the side, had already run over to Dongfang Tao's side. She grabbed one of his hands and said coquettishly, "Master, don't forget what you promised me. You must take a good look at Sister Su." All right. I know." Dongfang Tao was obviously very fond of Xian. He shook his head helplessly. Then he looked at Su Qingjun. He looked her up and down. He smiled and said, "You are Su Qingjun. I have long heard that senior brother Mahara has accepted a good disciple. Seeing you today, you really live up to your reputation. You are really a talented genius." Su Qingjun blushed. She bowed her head and said, "Shishu is too kind." Dongfang Tao smiled gently at Su Qingjun. "Xian has already told me everything. Don't worry. I will naturally do my best to help you take a look at your brother. Get someone to bring him in." Su Qingjun's face lit up. She said gratefully, "Thank you, Shishu." Chapter 2:15. Because Dongfang Tao wanted to examine Sumo carefully, the two young women, Xian and Su Qingjun, left first and stood in the corridor not far from the tea room, waiting. The corridor was built of pine wood and painted with colorful paint. The horizontal sill was painted with all kinds of exquisite patterns of mountains, rivers, and all kinds of auspicious beasts were carved on the left and right eaves, lively and lifelike. Outside the corridor, there were all kinds of trees, tall and straight. The leaves of the closest banana trees had been washed by the rain until they were verdant and tender. It was a very lovable sight. The raindrops fell on the eaves and the ground, making pitter-patter sounds, adding a trace of serenity to the originally quiet place. Su Qingjun looked at the misty rain outside the corridor, her brows slightly furrowed, as if she was in a trance. "Sister Su, don't worry, there's always hope." Xian saw Su Qingjun's expression and couldn't help but comfort her. Su Qingjun smiled and said in a low voice, "I know, thank you, sister." Xian nodded and also looked at the rain outside the corridor, but there was no melancholy on her face. After a while, she seemed to remember something and said to Su Qingjun, "Right, Sister Su, I want to ask you something." "Yes, what is it?" Su Qingjun said. Xian said, "I went to Flying Goose Terrace yesterday because I hadn't seen Brother Lu and Atsu for a long time. But when I went to see, I found that Brother Lu and Atsu were not there, and," she stole a glance at Su Qingjun and said, "Brother Lu's things don't seem to be in his wooden hut anymore. It looks like he's moved away." Su Qingjun was silent. After a while, she nodded lightly and said, "Yes, Lu Chen moved away." Xian was shocked and said, "What's going on, Sister Su?" Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment, but she still roughly told Xian about what happened that day. Then she smiled bitterly and said, "I didn't expect Lu Chen to be like this. These days, my family was in a mess because of Sumo. Maybe I had neglected something in my daily life. I forgot that Sumo had hurt him before, so I didn't pay attention to his feelings. That's why he left angrily and even asked me to cancel his title as a nominal disciple." Xian was stunned, and then said with some distress, "This Brother Lu, what is he doing all of a sudden? I've never seen him so impulsive in the past." Su Qingjun pursed her lips and said, "Perhaps, he was dissatisfied with me, so he was impulsive. On the contrary, in front of you, he has always been fine. I also don't understand what he is thinking." Xian giggled and said, "Sister Su, don't worry, leave this matter to me." Su Qingjun asked curiously, "What are you going to do?" Xian said, "I'll go find Brother Lu later and ask him what is going on. This person is getting old, maybe he has become stupid. He clearly had such a comfortable life with you on Flying Goose platform, but he just doesn't want to live it and wants to make trouble. I have to scold him to wake him up." As she said that, she pursed her lips and looked a little unconvinced as she complained, "Look at him, he still calls me stupid all day long. The most stupid person should be himself." Although Su Qingjun was worried about Sumo's injury at the moment and was not in a good mood, she looked at Xian and could not help but laugh. She shook her head and said with a smile, "You too, why do you always say others are stupid? Moreover, Lu Chen is not even 30 this year, how can he be considered old like you said? Those who don't know would think that he is now 70 or 80 years old." Xian snorted and said, "I think Brother Lu's tone and the way he talks are really like an old man. In short, when things are done here, I will go find him and help you scold him." Su Qingjun shook her head and wanted to dissuade her, but she thought to herself, "What do you mean by going to force that person to stay or persuade him to come back?" However, when the words were on the tip of her tongue, her heart suddenly softened. She wanted to say something but stopped herself. In the end, she laughed bitterly and thought to herself, "Go ahead, I still have a lot of things to do here. I can't care so much. If Xian wants to say it, then say it. Who cares if you want to come back or not?" At this time, Dongfang Tao's slightly bewildered voice suddenly rang out in the originally quiet tea room, as if he had discovered something shocking. Su Qingjun and Xian were both shocked. After looking at each other, they hurriedly ran to the tea room and pushed the door open. In the tea room, they saw that Sumo had been placed on a recliner to the side. Her face was pale and her eyes were tightly shut, as if she had already fainted. Dongfang Tao stood beside him with a rather ugly expression on his face. Without waiting for Su Qingjun to speak, Xian had already rushed to ask, Master, did you discover something?" Dongfang Tao's expression was dark as he said coldly, "It's the mind-altering technique." Su Qingjun was shocked at first, then overjoyed. Although many of the seniors of the sect who had seen Sumo in the past could tell that Sumo's mind had been damaged, they could not tell what method it was. Only today, when Dongfang Tao examined her, was able to directly tell what technique Sumo had endured. This had never happened before. At this moment, Su Qingjuan's originally somewhat despaired mood seemed to suddenly see a glimmer of light in the darkness. She could not help but become excited. On the side, Xian asked in confusion, "The mind-altering technique? What is that?" Dongfang Tao frowned and ignored his disciple. After thinking for a moment, he turned to face Su Qingjun. A trace of anticipation appeared on Su Qingjuan's face as she nervously looked at spiritual master Yuanying, Uncle Master Dongfang. "Can Sumo still be saved?" Dongfang Tao hesitated for a moment, then said in a low voice, "Your brother has been inflicted with an extremely overbearing mind-altering technique. Because his cultivation is too low, the overbearing spiritual energy rushed into his brain and damaged his mind." Su Qingjun secretly clenched her fists. "Uncle Master Dongfang, please save him." Dongfang Tao was silent for a moment, then said, "I can see the cause of his illness, but I cannot cure the mind-altering technique. However, I know who can, but that person's temper is strange, I'm afraid." Su Qingjun bowed down. "Uncle Master, please save my brother. No matter the price, the Su family will do our best." Dongfang Tao frowned and paced back and forth in the room. After a moment, he looked at Xian with a deep gaze. Xian was puzzled by her master's gaze and asked in surprise, "Master, why are you looking at me? Quickly help Sister Su." Dongfang Tao smiled bitterly, shook his head and sighed, then said to Su Qingjun, "Fine, I'll give up my old face and help you. If I'm lucky, I might be able to get an antidote for you." Su Qingjuan's face was filled with gratitude and joy as she nodded repeatedly, "Thank you, Uncle Master." Dongfang Tao took a deep breath, then walked towards the door of the tea room with his hands behind his back. Melaleuca japonica looked at him with some concern, walked over and whispered, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, at most we'll fight again," Dongfang Tao said lightly. "Anyway, I'm Yuanying now, he can't beat me." Xian was a warm-hearted and good girl who kept her word. After Dongfang Tao had left, she waited idly, and since she had nothing to do, she left the tea room and descended the mountain to look for Lu Chen. However, Lu Chen had now left Flying Goose Terrace. According to Su Qingjun, when he left that day, he only said that they were no longer master and disciple, but did not mention a word about his future plans. Therefore, Su Qingjun herself did not know where Lu Chen had gone. In this huge Kunlun mountain, there were almost 100,000 odd-job disciples. If she really wanted to look for them one by one, it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. However, of course, Xian was not such a stupid girl. People who usually said that she was stupid were slandering her, such as that old man, called Lu Chen. Xian scolded Lu Chen in her heart to vent her anger, then quickly thought of a way. Based on her understanding of Lu Chen, if she wanted to find Lu Chen now, other than Flying Goose Terrace, there were a few other places. She went to Flowing Fragrance Garden, but unfortunately, there was no harvest. She went to Stone Mountain, but also did not see him. Xian ran to the mountain gate, ran to the mountain pavilion where she first met Lu Chen on Kunlun Mountain, and also did not see his shadow. This man seemed to suddenly disappear from the Kunlun party, no one noticed, and no one knew. Where did he go? Later, Xian suddenly thought that no matter what, even if this person left Flying Goose Terrace, he would still have to find a place to live in the Kunlun Mountain. Therefore, she quickly thought of the house that Lu Chen used to live in. She ran over excitedly, but saw that the door of Lu Chen's old house was guarded by an iron general, and it was covered with dust. Obviously, no one lived here. Turning around the back of the house, she could actually see a small dog hole. A long time ago, Black Dog came in and out of this place. Xian was a little discouraged. For the first time, she felt that this brother Lu seemed to be hiding in a secret place, and she could not find him. When she thought of how she had boasted in front of Su Qingjuan's sister Su, Xian felt a little embarrassed, but there was nothing she could do. She just sighed, turned around, and left. This place was the residential area of the part-time disciples, and many houses were occupied. They used to be Lu Chen's neighbors. But now it was daytime, and most of the people had already left to work. There were not many people left, and there were only a few lonely houses. As she was walking, Xian suddenly stopped. She saw a strange-looking house in the distance. Compared to the surrounding houses, that house looked especially cold and dilapidated. Xian suddenly felt that it was a little familiar, and walked in the direction of that house for a distance. When she got closer, she suddenly remembered that this house used to belong to He Changsheng. Later, after the vicious devil cult spies killed He Changsheng, this house was abandoned here for some reason. She was looking at the house in a daze. Suddenly, a hand stretched out from behind her, and gently patted her shoulder. Xian was startled, and jumped up in fright, shouting loudly, "Who? Who is it?" Chapter 2:16. The surroundings were cold and quiet. Anyone would be scared to death if they were suddenly patted on the back like this. Xian's heart was in her throat. She turned around and saw a person standing behind her. It was Lu Chen, whom she had been looking for a long time. "Ah, it's you, Brother Lu?" Xian called out subconsciously. Lu Chen smiled and said, "Isn't it me? What about you? What are you doing here?" He looked around, and his eyes stopped for a moment on the abandoned house where the dead person used to live. He said to Xian, "No one usually comes here. I heard that after the person died, the house is often haunted in the middle of the night." "Ah." Xian's body trembled again, and even her face turned pale. But she soon found that Lu Chen was smiling. She immediately reacted and became angry. She hit his arm hard and said angrily, "You scared me again." Lu Chen laughed. For some reason, looking at Xian made him feel better. He smiled and said, "I heard it, but I haven't seen it." "Oh, you haven't told me why you are here." "To look for you." Xian glared at him. She gnashed her teeth in hatred and said, "Do you know how many places I've been looking for you today?" Let's not talk about the Flying Goose Terrace. I've gone to the Fragrance Garden and Rock Mountain one by one, but I didn't see your shadow. Lu Chen was startled. He stopped smiling and said with some surprise, so urgent? Why are you looking for me? Yes, I have something. Xian said, I heard that you and Sister Su had a falling out. Not only did you leave with your bag, but you also asked Sister Su to cancel the nominal master-disciple relationship. Lu Chen nodded and said, that's true. Xian stamped her feet and said, I say, why are you so stupid? Do you know what kind of person Sister Su is now? In the whole Kunlun Mountain, there are at least 99,900 odd job disciples who are crying and begging to be her disciple. But you ran away by yourself? Lu Chen smiled and said, did Su Qingjun ask you to come see me? Bah, in your dreams. Xian looked at his disappointed face and said angrily, of course it's impossible. Sister Su is now the youngest Jin Dan friar in the Kunlun party. She has a bright future and is even likely to become Yuan Jinren. Do you think she will really value an ordinary disciple like you? Lu Chen said, oh. Xian patted her forehead. It seemed that she was completely speechless because of Lu Chen's fearless look. After a while, she said, Brother Lu, listen to my advice. Go back and apologize to Sister Su. A man should know when to yield and when to stand tall. What's there to be afraid of? Moreover, I can see that big Sister Su has good intentions towards you. As long as you give in a little and I help you put in a few good words, you will definitely be able to make her retract her order. As she said that, she rolled her eyes again and suddenly laughed. She pulled Lu Chen and whispered, Brother Lu, why don't you pretend again and say that you have encountered some tragic and sad thing, and shed some tears? I guarantee that Sister Su will definitely not be able to bear it and will definitely take you back. Nonsense. Lu Chen said seriously, a man should bleed but not shed tears. You actually want me to cry? Oh, I said it's just an act. Xian glared at Lu Chen, then encouraged him with a grin, go. You can't go wrong listening to me. I'm doing this for your own good. Otherwise, when you get older in the future, without a backer or something, it will be difficult to survive in this mountain. I tell you. Lu Chen looked at Xian's face and his eyes gradually became warm. He smiled and said, you actually think so far. Xian grumpily said, everyone would think like that, okay. I say you are a little strange recently. I always feel that you are becoming more and more stupid. Maybe it's because you are getting older. Lu Chen laughed and looked at her, shaking his head and said, if that's the case, then when I am old in the future, I will look for you to be my backer and let you raise me. Is that okay? Xian was stunned and said in surprise, me? Lu Chen nodded and said, yes, aren't you also a disciple of Yuan Jinren? In the future, you will definitely not be bad, is that okay? This. Xian seemed to have never thought about this problem. She thought for a while and said with some distress, if you put it like that, it seems that it is okay. But Sister Su's talent and future is much better than mine. To be honest, you should still follow her to have a future. If you really can't do it, then you can look for me. When she said the last sentence, Xian's cheeks suddenly seemed to brighten a little. She looked a little proud. She raised her head and put her hands on her hips and said, hey. You come, call me master for me to hear. Lu Chen laughed and put his hand on her head and pushed her away. He scolded with a smile, little girl, you have learned bad things. Xian took a step back and pouted her head. But very quickly she became happy again and said to Lu Chen, hey, I won't joke anymore, Brother Lu. Listen to me and go talk to Sister Su. This will really benefit your status as an odd job disciple. Lu Chen thought for a while and looked at Xian's eyes that were full of expectation. He smiled and nodded, all right, I will listen to you. But these 2 days are the sect council meeting. The mountain is busy. She is Jin Dan friar, so she will probably be busy too. After these few days, we will go look for her together. Xian thought for a while and said, well, this is also good. Sister Sue has been really busy recently. Today she even sent her brother to Melaleuca japonica martial ant's tea room to ask my master to help treat him. Then in a few days, I will look for you. Lu Chen smiled and said, all right, it's a deal. Xian waved to him and turned to leave. After 2 steps, she suddenly turned back and asked, oh right, Brother Lu, I haven't seen Atsu recently. How is it? Lu Chen said, it's very good. It eats well and runs fast. It's so wild outside all day that it doesn't want to go home. Oh. Xian smiled and continued to walk forward. This time, after walking for about a few feet, she stopped again and shouted to Lu Chen, Brother Lu, where do you live now? I can't find you. Lu Chen was startled for a moment, then smiled and said, it's okay. I will look for you when the time comes. Xian smiled and nodded, then turned and left. Seeing that Xian was getting further and further away, even her figure gradually disappeared from his sight, the smile on Lu Chen's face slowly faded. He looked up at the sky. The continuous drizzle was still falling, drenching the houses in the forest. He turned around and quietly looked at the abandoned wooden house. Then he walked forward, turned a corner in the middle, and walked into the very wide forest in the distance. Like in the past, the forest was very quiet, but this time there was a little more sound of rain beating on the leaves than usual. Walking into the forest, the rain suddenly became less heavy, but the air in the forest was very humid. It seemed that everywhere was wet, and the rain kept dripping from the branches and leaves in the high places. Lu Chen was like a ghost, moving silently in the forest. Even if he occasionally passed by the wet ground, he didn't know what method he used, but he didn't leave any footprints. He didn't know how long he walked, but he finally saw the big rock in the depths of the forest, as well as the big tree that was different from the surrounding trees. The forest was abnormally quiet, and the wet rain fell. Not only did the birds and beasts stay away, it seemed that even the insects were silent. Lu Chen's eyes slowly brightened. His gaze swept across the surrounding ground, looking at every tree, and even every piece of gravel and weed, not sparing a single strand of grass. After a while, he walked over to the big tree and stood next to the big rock. Rain dripped from the top of his head, falling on the top of his head and flowing down his cheeks, but he didn't seem to care at all. His gaze became brighter and sharper, even faintly fierce. He looked everywhere, and finally lowered his head, looking at his feet. The ground was black, wet, and dirty soil, and a thick layer of withered leaves had fallen on it. Who knew how many years had passed, day after day, year after year, piling up here? Many of the withered leaves seemed to have rotted, their scorched and withered color similar to the color of the soil. Perhaps after a while, these rotten leaves would also become a part of the soil. Lu Chen stared at the black soil and withered leaves at his feet, thinking silently for a long time. Then he suddenly raised his head and took a deep breath. In the ancient land of the divine Central Plains, there had been a saying passed down from ancient times, to be buried in peace. This meant that no matter how a person lived, they would eventually die. Only after death could they be buried in the ground, in the boundless ancient soil, would the dead feel at ease, and would find the best place to return to in this life. No one had ever thought about what it was like to be buried in the soil, because only the dead would lie deep underground, covered by the soil. Lu Chen wasn't a dead person, but on this day, he was lying in the black soil of this place. In a very strange way, he was like a cold snake hiding in the shadows. The damp, black, dirty soil was mixed with rotten leaves, and there were even all sorts of unimaginable insects, as well as a nauseating stench. This was not a place an ordinary person could stay in. However, Lu Chen was like a dead man as he stopped under the dark soil. The black soil and thick, withered leaves completely covered his body. After the rain fell from the sky for a night, there was no longer any trace of his existence in the forest. There was only an extremely thin, hollow twig stuck into the soil amidst the withered leaves. It stood unremarkable, and after a long time, it would tremble slightly. The rain continued for an entire night. Chapter 217. Another night passed. The rain stopped in the morning, but the sky was still hazy. The dark clouds continued to gather, and it looked like it would rain again at any time. After a night of rain, Kunlun Mountain appeared much clearer and brighter in the morning. A fresh breeze blew across the mountain range, bringing with it a moist smell. However, amidst this beautiful scenery, there were a few places in Kunlun Mountain that remained unchanged. One was the forbidden area with thick fog beneath the clouds in the sky. All the rain that fell on the fog seemed to disappear, not affecting it in the slightest. The other place was the martyr's grave. This place that was hidden in a dark corner at the back of the nameless mountain seemed to always be dark and gloomy. Even the morning breeze seemed unwilling to blow over. However, on this morning, in the dark courtyard of the martyr's grave, there were waves of dull echoes. Sometimes it was intense, sometimes it was soothing. Rays of strange light flickered incessantly in the darkness, emitting magnificent splendor. At the same time, a powerful aura burst forth. Sometimes, even the ground beneath their feet would tremble a few times. After a long time, the fierce battle in the courtyard of the martyr's grave finally came to a stop. The various rays of light dimmed and disappeared. All kinds of sounds stopped as well. Everything seemed to have returned to normal. In the dark courtyard, Dongfang Tao and the corpse watcher stood facing each other. Dongfang Tao's expression was solemn, while the corpse watcher's expression was ugly. Of course, the corpse watcher's expression had always been extremely ugly, so it was impossible to tell what he was feeling at the moment. After a while, Dongfang Tao was the first to speak. "How is it?" The corpse watcher glared at him fiercely, but after a moment, he still fished out a small bottle from his bosom and tossed it to him. Dongfang Tao reached out to catch it and opened it to take a look. There was only a white spirit pill in the bottle. He frowned and asked, "How do I take it?" The corpse watcher said in a hoarse voice, "Just take it with water. After that, you'll feel sleepy. Sleep well for 2 days, and you'll naturally be fine." Dongfang Tao nodded and closed the lid again, putting it back into his bosom. The corpse watcher looked at him coldly and suddenly sneered, "Sure enough, after cultivating to the Yuanying realm, you become arrogant. You actually dare to take the initiative to fight?" Dongfang Tao shook his head and said, "Firstly, I'm not here to fight. I'm here to ask for the antidote. You were the one who insisted on forcing me to have a spar with you. I had no choice but to do so. Secondly, does winning against you make me arrogant? I don't quite understand what you mean." The zombie's face turned uglier by the second, but he probably knew that since he had lost, there was nothing more to say. He grunted coldly and turned around, wanting to leave. However, at this time, Dongfang Tao opened his mouth to stop him, saying, "I say, this kind of mind-controlling technique of yours is too overbearing. If you act so recklessly in the future, it will easily attract trouble." The zombie paused for a while, but he did not seem to mind. He said coldly, "I didn't expect you to think for me." Dongfang Tao said indifferently, "After all, we are fellow apprentices. By the way, are there any taboos after taking this antidote?" The zombie said rather impatiently, "What taboo? It's fine. It's just that the mind-controlling technique involves some hidden dangers in the brain. If it wasn't for the sudden great change of heaven and earth during the course of the medicinal effect within 2 days after taking the medicine, other than the possibility of affecting the medicinal effect, there wouldn't be any problems at all." Dongfang Tao nodded, appearing to be at ease. In the first place, the great change of heaven and earth was a major event. It was hard to say if it had happened even once in tens of thousands of years, much less thousands of years. The possibility of it happening was extremely small. When Xian came to find Su Qingjun outside the Flowing Fragrance Garden tea house, the latter was standing in the corridor looking at the green banana leaves that had been washed by the raindrops. She looked a little lost in thought. Xian jumped over and pulled Su Qingjun, calling out with a smile, "Sister Su." Su Qingjun was startled, but when she saw that it was Xian, she immediately smiled and said, "Little sister, you've come?" Xian grunted in response, then looked around and asked, "Why are you standing here? Are you waiting for someone?" Su Qingjun said, "Oh, Sumo is resting in the guest room now. This morning, Senior Uncle Dongfang Tao went out to find the antidote for my brother. I'm feeling a little uneasy, so I wanted to wait here for him to return." Xian nodded and smiled. "It's fine. Since my master said so, he'll definitely be able to do it. Don't worry, Sister Su." Su Qingjun smiled and nodded. Xian looked around to make sure no one was around, then pulled on Su Qingjun's sleeve and said, "Right, Sister Su, I've been looking for a long time yesterday and finally found Brother Lu." Su Qingjun raised her eyebrows slightly, and there seemed to be a glimmer of light in her bright eyes, but her expression didn't change. She only said softly, "Oh, how was it?" Xian smiled and said, "I caught him and gave him a good scolding. I scolded him until he bled like a dog. I helped you vent your anger." Su Qingjun was taken aback and said, Why did you scold him?" Xian stole a glance at Su Qingjun's expression and said, "That person is too stupid. I had to scold him. I scolded him for his own good. I must scold him to wake him up." Su Qingjun wanted to say something but stopped. After a while, she smiled bitterly and shook her head without saying anything. Xian said, "I told him that he is cruel and unscrupulous. He doesn't know what's good for him. From the beginning to the end, it was Sister Su who treated him kindly, taking him in and taking care of him. Why did he, a servant disciple, become so arrogant and arrogant? Am I right, Sister Su?" Su Qingjun looked a little embarrassed and said, Sister Xian, you can't say that." Xian stretched out her hand to stop Su Qingjun and said, "Sister, don't worry about it. Anyway, I told him clearly that he must come back and apologize to you. If you don't forgive him, let him kowtow to you and ask for forgiveness. Well, let him kneel in front of your cave residence's stone door for 10 days to half a month. Let's see if he still remembers." Su Qingjun's cheeks turned red and she shook her head repeatedly. No. If you say that, Lu Qin, he'll probably die of anger." Xian snorted and said, "He still dares to be angry? He still dares to show you his face after doing something wrong. I'll be letting him off easy if I don't hit him." As she spoke, her expression changed, and she pulled Su Qingjun's hand with a grin. "But sister, look at Brother Lu. He's all alone. He's lost his parents since he was young, and he's suffered countless hardships. In addition, his talent is poor. He's already so old, yet he still hasn't accomplished anything. He's also not handsome. He really doesn't have anything. It's too miserable. Why don't you just take pity on him and let him come back?" Su Qingjun sighed and said, "Your words are too harsh. Actually, I'm not angry at him. From the beginning to the end, he left on his own. If he really wants to return to Flying Goose Terrace, then come back." As she said that, her voice became softer and a trace of red flashed across her face. But she still said it clearly. Xian was overjoyed. She clapped her hands and said, "That's good. When I get back, I'll tell Brother Lu and let him come back to apologize to you." "Humph. If you ask me, men are so stupid. They can live a peaceful life, but they insist on making trouble." As she said that, she had a disapproving look on her face. It seemed that she despised Lu Qin very much. Su Qingjun smiled and nodded. But when she thought of how Lu Qin looked when he left that day, she felt that it wasn't as simple as Xian said. But thinking about it, Xian wouldn't lie to her. She said that she was going to find Lu Qin, so she must have found him and said those words. When Lu Qin's face flashed across her mind, Su Qingjun had a faint strange feeling. After a moment of silence, she said to Xian, "Sister Xian, how about this? Tomorrow is the Sex Council meeting. As Jean Dan Friar, I have to participate. I can't leave. After tomorrow, if he's willing, you can bring him to see me at any time. Okay?" Xian clapped her hands and said with a smile, "Okay, I got it." Actually, when I told Brother Lu about this yesterday, he also mentioned this point. He said that you'll be very busy these few days and asked me not to disturb you. As she said that, Xian smiled and said, "See, the two of you have telepathy. You're thinking of the same thing." Su Qingjun blushed and said angrily, "Hey, sister, don't talk nonsense. These things. Everyone can think of these things, they can see it. What's there to care about telepathy? Nonsense." Xian covered her mouth and giggled. Su Qingjun didn't know why, but her mood suddenly seemed to be a lot better. She felt relaxed and said to Xian, "Anyway, this matter is settled. You can come with him later." "Oh, but there's still a troublesome matter." Xian said, "What is it?" Su Qingjun said, "I'm going to attend the sect council tomorrow. Dongfang Shirshu and Melaleuca Japonica Shirshu will also be there. But Sumo can't leave him alone yet. It feels a little. It's fine." Xian said readily, "I'll help you look after him. It's only a day." Su Qingjun said gratefully, "Then I'll trouble you, sister." "Thank you." Xian smiled and said, "No need to thank me. It's just a small matter." As she said, she moved closer and put her face on Su Qingjun's fair and tender cheek. She said softly with a smile, "As long as you promise to let Brother Lu come back, it'll be fine." Su Qingjun patted Xian's forehead and scolded with a smile, "You little girl, I'm also curious. You don't seem to care about other people like this. Why are you only so concerned about Lu Chen? Don't tell me you've fallen in love with him?" Xian was stunned, then her cheeks turned red. She stamped her feet and said, "Sister Su, what nonsense are you talking about? I only help Brother Lu because he's pitiful. Who would like him?" As she spoke, she muttered to herself, "He has no money, no power, and is in dire straits. His talent is poor, and he's not even handsome. If I were blind, would I fall for him?" Su Qingjun laughed for a moment and didn't care. Hearing footsteps at the door, it seemed that Dongfang Tao had returned. She hurriedly called Xian and rushed to the door. In the corridor, Xian didn't immediately follow. She frowned slightly and looked at the banana leaves outside the corridor. Suddenly, she was lost in thought. After a while, she suddenly shook her head, pouted and said angrily, "Who would like him, humph?" Chapter 218. There was only one night left before the night of the full moon, but it was still cloudy in Kunlun Mountain. After the sky darkened, it began to rain again. This rain seemed to be heavier than yesterday. It was mixed with the cold wind blowing from the north, and there was a chill that seeped into one's skin. The world seemed to be filled with a cold and murderous aura. In the cold wind and rain, the forest seemed to be shivering in the dark night. In the forest, a black shadow walked out from a dark corner. A little fire burned in its eyes. It was Atsu. At this moment, for some reason, the black dog's body had swelled to more than double its usual size. At the same time, a pair of sharp, snow-white fangs emerged from its mouth, emitting a chilling glow in the night. There was dark red blood dripping from its lips and teeth. Behind it, one could vaguely see a dead monster on the ground. Its blood was washed by the rain and flowed to the ground. Atsu's footsteps were also a little unstable. It seemed that the battle just now was not easy for it. There was blood dripping from its body, mixed with the rain and dyed its fur red. Half of the blood was from the dead monster, and the other half flowed from the wounds on Atsu's body. In the cold night, the blood flowed, but it gradually emitted a mysterious aura. It was ferocious and powerful, but it also seemed to have a slightly tempting fragrance. It was like the sacrificial offerings on the ancient demonic god's altar. The fragrance was carried away by the wind, drifting through the dark night, the ceaseless rain, and the mountains and forests. Gradually, the dark night started to stir. There was a beast's roar in the distance, rising and falling. Atsu stopped and turned its only eye to look into the distance. Then, it looked back at the wounds and blood on its body. The rain gradually became heavier. The cold wind blew mournfully, and the cold rainwater wrapped in knives hit its body. The darkness in front of him surged, as if attracted by this fragrance that suddenly appeared. In this vast night, countless terrifying and ferocious auras suddenly approached this nameless forest. The green flames in Atsu's single eye flickered. Then, he shook off the rain on his body and continued to move forward. The night grew darker, and the wind and rain became more intense. It slowly walked up to the highest point of the mountain. However, when it raised its head to look at the night sky, in the cold and dark sky, there was only wind and rain and dark clouds. There was not a trace of the moon. On this night that was only one day away from the full moon, on this night that should have been bright and full, only the cold rain covered the world. It carried with it the endless darkness and the terrifying aura of the shadows as it pounced towards the black dog. It was late at night, and it was raining heavily on Kunlun Mountain. This night was unexpectedly cold. Even the cultivators who had always cultivated and were not afraid of the cold and heat would feel a chill. Therefore, except for the disciples who patrolled the mountain, most people stayed in their residences. They either meditated or listened to the sound of the rain, waiting for the heavy rain and the dark night to pass. Jinren Idle Month was alone in his room. Because of his special identity, as the Jinren of the Kunlun party, he did not have his own cave like most Yuanying realm Jinren, nor did he live on the winter peak between the clouds because he was the eldest disciple of Hakushin Jinkuan. Although, logically speaking, he could receive both kinds of treatment. Since he was the Jinren of Kunlun, he could only live in one place, which was the Jingyang Hall of Tiankuan Peak. This was the place where the previous Jinren of the Kunlun party lived. It was the center of the power of the entire Kunlun party. For thousands of years, many extraordinary people and peerless figures had appeared here, and many shocking events had happened here. However, as time passed, geniuses came and went, but only the silent mountain peak and the towering hall had always stood here, never changing. In the dead of the night, Jinren Idle Month had no intention of sleeping. He lit a candle and closed the door and windows. When the wind and rain outside blew against the closed window, he was in front of the bronze mirror in the room, wearing a solemn dress that only the Jinren of Kunlun could wear. This dress was solemn, elegant, and beautiful. Under normal circumstances, there was no opportunity to wear it, unless there was a special festival or a major event. Only then would the Jinren of Kunlun wear this dress. Over the years, the Kunlun party had been peaceful, so Jinren Idle Month only had one opportunity to wear it a year. It was tomorrow. His hand gently stroked the solemn and dignified gown, and a trace of complacency and pride appeared on his face. In this life, although there were twists and turns and pain on the road of cultivation, in general, it could be considered to be very smooth. The achievements he had achieved at this age had far exceeded most people in this world. He could indeed be proud. However, in front of him, there was still a long road ahead of him on that seemingly endless path from the ancient times to the present. However, Daoist Master Idle Moon felt that he could already see his master's tall and broad back. Perhaps one day, he would truly be able to catch up to him. At that time, what would it feel like? Jinren Idle Month smiled and looked at his majestic self in the bronze mirror. The Heavenly Soldier Hall was one of the most important and powerful halls in the Kunlun party. The head, Dukan Jinren, was also highly respected in the sect and had an illustrious reputation. On this night, Dukan Jinren stayed in his cave residence. Similar to Jinren Idle Month on Tiankuan Peak, Dukan Jinren was also in a good mood. He had supported the head of the sect, Immortal Idle Moon, for many years. In these years, although the Kunlun sect was peaceful to the outside world, there were always some fights at the level of Immortal of Yuanying stage that would not be seen by others. Some people did not like Jinren Idle Month and did not want Jinren Idle Month to take the position of the Jinren sect master. But Jinren Idle Month himself was very outstanding. Not to mention, he had a true monarch master who was second to none in terms of cultivation and reputation. Therefore, from the beginning, Dukan Jinren firmly stood on the side of Jinren Idle Month. He was his pawn, his left and right hand, waving the flag and shouting for Jinren Idle Month. Finally, he obtained the trust of Jinren Idle Month and the true monarch behind him. This trust quickly gave Dukanjinren a huge return. It made him and his heavenly soldier hall famous in the sect. They also obtained more and more cultivation resources. There was nothing better than this. Dukanjinren was very satisfied with the choice he had made for so many years. He had never wavered in the slightest. Watching the night pass, he would still stand beside Jinren Idle Month at the sect council meeting tomorrow, waving the flag and shouting for him. Of course, before that, he would go with his favorite disciple, He, to catch that hateful traitor of the devil cult. Dukanjinren closed his eyes with a smile and began to meditate. At the same time, in a place not far from his cave, He, who was also from the heavenly soldier hall, was also awake. He quietly stood under the eaves, watching the rain falling from the cold and dark night sky. In front of his eyes, the rain dripped down from the eaves, rustling into his ears, turning into thousands of crystal-clear water droplets floating in the wind. Finally, they fell on the bluestone floor on the ground and quietly burst into pieces. In the darkness, the water droplets turned into powder and flowed into the depths of the distant darkness. His face was a little pale, probably because of the chill brought by the cold wind. The powder of the rain fell on his face, but he did not move an inch. He stared into the distance of the night, his mouth moved a few times, as if he was whispering to someone. That night, Su Qingjun stayed in the guest room of the flowing fragrance garden. Dongfang Tao kept his promise and brought her the antidote that was said to be able to cure Sumo. After taking the antidote, Sumo immediately fell into a deep sleep and did not wake up. According to Dongfang Tao, this was a normal situation. Usually, one would sleep for at least 2 or 3 days. At the same time, he told Su Qingjun some things that needed to be paid attention to and taboo things. Su Qingjun was naturally very grateful for this. Since Sumo was unconscious and injured, it was inconvenient for him to move around, so she stayed here to take care of him. Her family in Kunwa City also sent people back with the news, so it was easy to imagine how happy her parents were. She walked to the bed and looked at Sumo. She saw that he was sleeping very quietly, even a bit like a child. She suddenly became somewhat absent-minded. She suddenly remembered the appearance of her younger brother when he was born many years ago, as well as the many cute moments when he slowly grew up. Her eyes gradually softened, and she gently pulled the blanket over Su Mo a little tighter. She thought to herself that after this incident, she would take some time to properly teach Su Mo a lesson. He had been so cute since he was young, and his nature was not bad. A gust of cold wind suddenly blew open the window and extinguished the candles in the room. Su Qingjun walked over and closed the window again. Before completely closing the window, she glanced at the dark night outside. She suddenly thought, on such a rainy night, where is that person now, and what is he doing? In a dark and quiet forest, the damp rainwater continuously poured into the soil, mixed with the smell of decay, giving people a creepy feeling. A poisonous snake slowly crawled out of the grass, bending its body as it crawled forward. However, when it was about to reach the ground covered with rotten leaves, the snake suddenly stopped. It raised its triangular head and hissed its tongue at the front. A gloomy light flashed in its ice-cold vertical pupils. After a moment, the snake suddenly changed direction and crawled to the side. And on the quiet soil, under the rotten leaves, a small hollow branch slightly trembled, then became quiet again, hiding in the darkness, quietly waiting. It was the coming dawn. Chapter 219. On the day of the full moon, the sky brightened very late. It was probably because there were still thick dark clouds in the sky that had yet to disperse, and even the sun had yet to be seen. However, in the early morning, the rain that had been raining for an entire night gradually stopped, as if to give the world some time to breathe. Even the cold wind had disappeared. As the sky slowly brightened, the Kunlun mountain that had been immersed in the miserable wind and rain for an entire night seemed to slowly come back to life, and gradually became lively. The people in the mountain each did their own thing. After that, some of the Kunlun cultivators with higher status walked towards the direction of Tian Kuan Peak from all directions one after another. The annual sect council of the Kunlun party lasted for a day, and could basically be divided into two sessions, one big and one small. The big session started in the day, and was the grandest. The participants were almost all the elites of the Kunlun party, all the cultivators above the Jin Dan realm, and a small number of the most outstanding genius disciples in the foundational realm would participate. On the other hand, the small session was much smaller. It was held at night, and the participants were only the 10 or so Jinren of the Yuanying realm. Although there was a huge difference in the size of the big session and the small session, in terms of importance, it was actually the small session at night, where the discussion at the level of the Yuanying Jinren seemed to be more important. Perhaps because of this, during the big session during the day, there were not many Yuanying Jinren of the Yuanying Jinren who came to Tianquan Peak's Jingyang Hall. Those who could come, in fact, had tacitly expressed their support for Jinren of the idle month. Most people below the Yuanying Jinren of the Yuanying Jinren would not feel these subtle things that could only be understood, but the Kunlun party was so big, and there were also many elite cultivators. There were always some smart people who had sharp ears and eyes, and were experienced in the ways of the world, and could see some things. At this time, there were already many people in the majestic and spacious Jinyang Hall. At the same time, there were still people coming from outside the hall, making the solemn hall that symbolized the center of power of the Kunlun party become lively, which was rarely seen. Dongfang Tao and Melaleuca Japonica also came here. When they walked into the hall, many Jin Dan friar and foundational realm cultivators who passed by saluted to Dongfang Tao. This was a natural respect for the strong cultivators of the Yuanying realm. It should be known that among the countless cultivators in the world, those who could cultivate to the level of Yuanying Jinren might not even be 1 in 100,000, let alone 1 in 10,000. Dongfang Tao's expression was indifferent, and did not reveal any arrogance, nor did he reveal any overly gentle expression. Tutu. In general, he looked up. This was the expression that most Yuanying Jinren of the lower level. Yen Luo looked around and said with a smile, "It's indeed impressive. It's different now that you're a nascent soul-perfected cultivator." Dongfang Tao's expression did not change. His expression was still solemn, but he said in a low voice, "This is all because I am afraid of trouble. If I were to give those people a slightly better attitude, do you believe that there would be people who would immediately try to befriend me and ask for advice?" Melaleuca Japonica smiled. She did not refute his words. She probably knew what was going on in her heart. However, since this matter did not concern her, she could not be bothered to care. She only smiled and said, "In any case, it has nothing to do with me. I will follow you. This year, I will be able to get a good seat." Dongfang Tao smiled. His gaze turned and saw that most of the people were standing in the center of Zhengyang Hall. However, the special small tables at the side of the hall were mostly empty. At a glance, there were only 2 or 3 people. As if sensing Dongfang Tao's gaze, those people also turned their heads and looked over. Both parties' gazes met in mid-air, after which they politely nodded to each other in greeting, and then turned their gazes away. Melaleuca Japonica's voice came from the side. This time, she also lowered her voice and said softly, "Not many people came." At this time, there were already many people standing in Zhengyang Hall. Furthermore, there were still people coming in from outside the door. It showed that the Kunlun party was thriving. Of course, it could not be that not many people came. However, Dongfang Tao's expression did not change. He said, "It is still early. There should be more people by afternoon." Melaleuca Japonica looked at him and said, "I thought you would only come at night." Dongfang Tao was silent for a moment. Then, he sighed and said, "You also understand these things in the sect. Those who came today during the day more or less have an explanation. At least, it can let the sect leader and the true monarch know my intentions." Melaleuca Japonica nodded and said, "You are right. It is just that I really thought that after you cultivated Yuanying, you would be as honest as before and not stand out to express your stance." Dongfang Tao shook his head. A bitter smile flitted across the corner of his mouth. He said, "It is not that I did not think that way. But when I really reached my current position, only then did I realize that there are also difficulties. The number of Yuanying Zenrens is too few. As he said this, Dongfang Tao looked at the empty tables at the side and said softly, "In the past, I could hide and fight because there were many Jin Dan Friar Zenrens. But there are only a dozen or so Yuanying Zenrens. It is clear who is right and who is wrong. Everyone is staring at you. You have no choice but to express your stance." Melaleuca Japonica sighed and said, "So, you chose the sect leader's side?" Dongfang Tao said, "If I don't choose Senior Brother Idol Month's side, what else can I choose? Am I really going to rely on Senior Brother Qiandang and Mingzhu from Baichao Tang's side? The sect leader's faction is now the strongest in our sect. Senior Brother Idol Month also has Hakushin Jinkuan backing him. Who can compete with him? Since I don't have any backing, if I want to find one, of course, I have to find the thickest thigh to cling to." Melaleuca Japonica shrugged and said, "You are right. If it were me, I would probably choose the same." Dongfang Tao smiled and glanced at the high and mighty main seat in the hall in the distance. He said, "Just watch. There will definitely be a lot of Yuanying Zenrens coming today. I heard that Uncle Master Bai Chen might be coming today." Yen Luo was taken aback. She said in a low voice, "Didn't he say that he was going to cultivate in peace last year and would no longer participate in the sect review meeting?" Dongfang Tao smiled without saying a word. Melaleuca Japonica quickly reacted and shook her head with a wry smile. Then, as if she suddenly thought of something, she said to Dongfang Tao, "But I haven't seen that person from the Heavenly Soldier Hall today. That's a little strange." Dongfang Tao thought for a moment and nodded. "Well, now that you mention it, I also feel it. Senior Brother Dukong has always been a strong supporter of Senior Brother Idol Month. He has always been the first to come in the past. I didn't expect him to be late today. But he will definitely come. It's probably because something urgent happened at the Heavenly Soldier Hall." Melaleuca Japonica grunted in acknowledgement. Clearly, she didn't pay much attention to the matter. Instead, her eyes suddenly lit up. She saw a beautiful and outstanding woman walking in from the entrance of Xingyang Hall. It was Su Qingjun. From afar, Su Qingjun seemed to see them. She immediately smiled, waved at the two, and bowed slightly. Dongfang Tao and Melaleuca Japonica both smiled and nodded. Melaleuca Japonica said with some emotion, "This young lady is really not bad. It would be great if I could accept such a disciple in the future." Dongfang Tao chuckled and didn't say anything. In the Heavenly Soldier Hall, Dukanjinren was dressed neatly. He looked radiant and in high spirits. His bearing was very dignified and awe-inspiring. As for he accompanied him all the way out. According to the results of yesterday's discussion, after Dukanjinren left the Heavenly Soldier Hall, he did not immediately head to Tianquan Peak Xingyang Hall. Instead, he turned and walked towards the direction of the house where he Changsheng died. Anyway, although the big meeting during the day was very grand and enthusiastic, the importance was not as important as the small meeting at night. What was more important was that there was a chance to catch the evil faction spy, which was a great merit. Dukanjinren could even imagine, when he caught the evil faction spy and threw him in front of sect head's senior brother, Idol Month's senior brother would be surprised and pleasantly surprised. And from this, there was no need to say how highly Idol Month's senior brother would regard him. The person that others couldn't catch, Dukanjinren had done it and caught him. Wasn't this enough to explain the problem? Dukanjinren was in a good mood and his footsteps were not slow. And he had been following his master all the way to that abandoned house. Then, according to the clues left behind, the meeting place with the evil faction spy should be in the nearby vast mountain forest. At this time, the surroundings were very quiet, there was no one walking around. There were quite a number of odd job disciples living in this place, but they had nothing to do with the grand sect meeting that was currently being held. In fact, most of the odd job disciples had gone to work as usual. Dukanjinren didn't mind at all and soon strode towards that stretch of forest. He watched his master's back figure, a trace of complicated expression flashed past his eyes, but very quickly he still followed closely. Just that when both of them walked to the edge of that stretch of forest and were about to enter, Conjuren suddenly frowned and stopped his footsteps. He was stunned for a moment and said, "Master, what's wrong?" Conjuren muttered to himself, I suddenly thought of something. This evil faction spy matter is not a small matter. By right, before I make a move, I still have to inform sect head's senior brother, at least after a discussion, get his permission before making a move." Speaking, Conjuren turned around and looked like he was about to leave. He was taken aback and hurriedly stopped him, said, "Master, where are you going?" Conjuren said, "I am going to Tianquan Peak, to discuss with Idle Month's senior brother, in case he has other plans and temporarily doesn't want to catch this spy. Wouldn't I be beating the grass and alerting the snake by going in this time?" Speaking, he smiled and said to Xiao, "We have to consider everything thoroughly before doing things. We must not be rash. Let's go see Idle Month's senior brother first." He was stunned when he saw Conjuren turned and walked away. His face suddenly turned pale, even a layer of cold sweat faintly appeared on his forehead. Chapter 220. "Teacher, hold on." He suddenly called out. Conjuren halted his steps, turned back and looked at said, "What is it?" He's mind turned rapidly, his eyes flickered slightly, his mouth instead said, "Disciple thinks, we still have to continue to the forest, to capture that evil faction spy." Conjuren frowned, for a moment pondered, although he had already decided to return to Tianquan Peak to discuss with Reverend Idle Month before taking action, but he was his proudest and most valued disciple. The weight of his words was naturally different from others, so for a moment he was somewhat hesitant. He took advantage of this rare moment, his eyes flashed and then suddenly took a step forward, stood beside Conjuren, lowered his voice and said, "Teacher, disciple thinks, this matter is a great merit, but this merit should be personally received by you." Conjuren's eyes flashed, after a moment of silence, said, "What do you mean by that?" He took a deep breath and said, "After you capture the evil faction spy and detain him to Tianquan Peak, then the merit of eliminating the spy will be mostly credited to you. But if you first make a trip to Tianquan Peak, at that time, I'm afraid everyone will say that this matter was planned by sect head reverend who commanded the overall situation, and teacher, you are at most a hired thug. Do you think what I said makes sense?" Conjuren's eyes narrowed slightly. After a moment he said, "Me and Idle Month's senior brother are like brothers. All these years we have been supporting each other, this merit or not, actually it is not too important, right?" He's expression had already completely calmed down, heard the words and smiled, said to Conjuren, "Teacher, you have always been wise and far-sighted. I don't believe that you have not thought of this. If you get the merit, it means that your ability is stronger. Idle Month Reverend should value you more. Other than that, I think." Speaking till here, He's voice suddenly lowered, softly said, "In this sect, between the clouds and the sky, isn't there still a deity realm true monarch? Teacher, we all know, that is the real emperor. For you to do a good job in this matter, you will only be able to reach that perfected lord's ears if you obtain the greatest merit. Otherwise, if you were to inform perfected sect master first, I'm afraid perfected Lord Bai Chen will think that this matter was planned by Uncle Master Idle Moon and that you are just an ordinary fighter." Conjuren's heart suddenly palpitated, a yearning expression appeared on his face, but he seemed to still have some misgivings, looked at and said in a low voice, "The real master of the Kunlun party now is Hakushin Jinkuan. I naturally know this in my heart. But no matter what, Idle Month is also the true monarch's personal disciple. There is a difference between close and distant. It is very difficult for me to surpass him, right?" He smiled and said, "Teacher, disciple did not purposely provoke the relationship between you and Reverend Idle Month. It is just that there is no need to inform him about this matter in advance. You did not do anything wrong at all. What's more, this matter was originally ordered by Reverend Idle Month. I found something and gave it to you, teacher. Isn't it also the right thing to do?" Conjuren pondered over and indeed felt that what he said was right, immediately clapped his hands, smiled and said, "What you said is indeed reasonable. My relationship with Idle Month's senior brother is naturally very good, but fighting for ourselves once in a while, it does not seem to be a bad thing." He smiled and said, "Isn't that so?" Conjuren smiled and nodded, said, "Then let's do it this way, let's go in. The earlier we can catch that cunning and vicious evil sect spy, the earlier we can go back and meet Idle Month's senior brother." Saying that, he turned around and once again walked into the forest, while he behind him, let out a long breath of turbid air, smiled bitterly, looked at Dukanjinren's back figure with a complicated expression. A moment later, he also followed. Not long after, both of their figures disappeared into the forest. Flowing fragrance garden, tea room, guest room. Su Qingjun had already left this place. At the same time, because her brother Sumo had been unconscious after taking the antidote, it was not suitable for him to go out, so he was temporarily placed in the guest room. Xian also came here early in the morning. Because of the agreement with Su Qingjun yesterday, she would help look after Sumo today. Walking to the middle of the room, from afar, she saw Sumo lying unconscious on the bed. Xian took a look and felt that there was nothing serious, so she sat at the desk by the window, looking at the somewhat hazy sky outside. At this time, there seemed to be a slight breeze, some chill drifted in from the window, but Xian did not care much, only felt that it was somewhat deserted. Probably because those with some ability and reputation here had all gone to Tianquan Peak Xingyang Hall, there was not much of a figure in the corridor outside the window. Xian sighed softly, leaned on the table, and thought in her heart, why did this day pass so slowly? If only time could pass faster. By tomorrow, I can go find Lu Qin, and then go see sister Su Qingjun together. Thinking of this, she could not help but smile again. Her mood became very good. Even the scene of the gathering dark clouds in the sky outside the room seemed a little brighter in her eyes. Between the clouds and the sky, on the winter peak. This morning, after White Lotus woke up, she felt a little uncomfortable in her heart, a little lazy, but she did not really want to stay in bed. Her mood became inexplicably strange and contradictory. White Lotus remembered that she did not have such strange feelings in the past, but in the recent 2 months, it would suddenly appear every 10 days to half a month. It was also strange. Could it be that this winter peak was too deserted, so my heart felt uncomfortable? But it could also be because of cultivating the ice and snow scripture. White Lotus always felt that ever since her master began to teach her this magical power, this strange feeling gradually appeared from nothing, and gradually increased. But this feeling did not have any harm or other signs. Perhaps it was just a normal reaction to cultivating this peerless magical power? White Lotus was not very clear about the reason here. She thought in her heart, whether she should find a chance to ask her master. After all, her 2 senior brothers did not cultivate this ice and snow scripture, so the only person who could explain her doubts was probably her master. It was just that during this period of time, Hakushin Jinkuan almost always cultivated in his snow-wind cave at the peak of the winter peak. He would not easily show up, even his 3 disciples rarely saw him. Now that the sect meeting was imminent, the old man might come out, but he probably did not have time for White Lotus, so after thinking about it in her heart, White Lotus thought that she would probably have to wait for a while. After dawdling in the cave for a while, White Lotus still felt a little upset. She did not know what was wrong with her today, but she still felt a little uneasy. So in the end, she still walked out of the cave. The sky was full of wind and snow. Almost everywhere in sight was pure white. This was the unique scenery of the winter peak, one of the 4 magical peaks in the sky, almost every day of the year. White Lotus had lived on this winter peak for a while, but most of the time, she was still attracted by this strange and beautiful scenery, the coldness that belonged to the world of ice and snow. It was not something that most people in the world could see. She walked slowly along the mountain path, feeling a little hesitant, wondering if she should go down from the winter peak, and go to the Flying Goose platform to look for Lu Qin again. That person, and that black dog, had some unspeakable secrets, and the one that White Lotus wanted to know the most was also one of those secrets, the secret of the blood food secret method. The sect meeting is such a high-class place, a useless servant disciple like him should not be able to go there, right? White Lotus thought to herself. Just as she was about to turn around and go down the mountain, White Lotus suddenly saw second senior brother Zhuxian standing on the mountain path in front of her. In the wind and snow, Zhuxian looked calm, his eyes were bright, and he was looking up at the sky. White Lotus followed his gaze and suddenly found that the sky was still gloomy, but second senior brother's eyes were fixed on the huge figure on the mountain peak. Second senior brother, why are you standing here? White Lotus called out to Zhuxian. Zhuxian was startled, and when he turned to see that it was White Lotus, a smile appeared on his face, and he said, "Ah, it's little junior sister." White Lotus walked over, stood beside Zhuo and said, "Senior brother, are you planning to welcome Master down?" "Actually, it's fine, Master should be coming down when the time comes." Zhuo smiled slightly, and said, "It's fine, I have nothing to do anyway, I'll just treat it as waiting for Master to come down." White Lotus suddenly became curious, and asked Zhuo, "Second senior brother, is the sect meeting fun?" "I haven't been there yet." Zhuo lightly shook his head, and said, "It's not that interesting, those with low skills will flatter each other, and those with high skills will get rid of their dissenters. Finally, and also the most important, Yuanying old man will organize a night party, and only at that time will it be the real sect meeting." White Lotus smiled, and said, "Actually second senior brother, recently you've helped eldest senior brother, and really did a lot of things. Usually, you did the most of the various kinds of communication and organization arrangements, and instead, I think eldest senior brother doesn't seem to be as busy as you." Zhuo laughed, and said, "What do you know, children shouldn't talk nonsense, or else if these words reach eldest senior brother's ears, then you'll be in trouble." White Lotus shrugged, and greeted Zhuo, only saying that it was windy here, and that when he went back to rest, she also walked back the way she came, but this time, she had already decided to go down the mountain, and then find that man called Lu Qin. But at this time, suddenly, Zhuo voice came from behind, and called out to her, "Little junior sister." White Lotus turned around, and asked, "What's the matter, second senior brother?" Zhuo looked at her appearance, his gaze was very gentle, and after letting out a breath, she heard him say calmly, "It's very cold here today, in a while, even Master and I will be leaving here, why don't you go down the mountain by yourself?" White Lotus was startled, and then looked at Zhuo with a surprised expression, and said in surprise, "You're telling me to go down the mountain by myself?" Chapter 221. Go down the mountain to play. Zhuo smiled and said, "It's rare for you to have such free time. Otherwise, if Master and eldest senior brother were here, they would only ask you to go and practice." White Lotus was still a little surprised, but she was a little happy in her heart. Ever since she entered the Kunlun party, especially after she became a disciple of Hakushin Jinkuan, she spent most of her time on the high and mighty winter peak. Other than sneaking down in private, she did not have much contact with the ordinary people in the sect. Of course, the people she had the most contact with were the 3 people in Hakushin Jinkuan's sect. However, Hakushin Jinkuan was busy with practice, and Immortal Idol Month, as the sect leader of Kunlun, was busy with many affairs. The one who took care of her the most and met her the most was this second senior brother. In fact, White Lotus had a good impression of Zhuo, but it was just a good impression. Although Zhuo was a veteran Jin Dan friar in the Kunlun party, and his reputation was extremely high, he had a master and a senior brother who were too dazzling. Instead, Zhuo seemed a little dim. For ordinary people and ordinary cultivators, the Jin Dan friar realm of 10 years was already the peak that they dreamed of. However, for Zhuo, the world often changed their view. Your master is a peerless deity transformation stage perfected cultivator, and your senior brother is a little inferior, but he is also a Yuanying perfected cultivator. At the same time, he also inherited the position of the Kunlun party's sect leader, and his name is known all over the world. Compared to these 2 geniuses, Jin Dan friar? What was that? There were always people who felt that if others did not reach the expectations that they randomly set in their hearts, it was because that person did not work hard or had poor talent. It was all that person's fault. However, no one really wanted to understand why that person was like that. White Lotus was a mature child. It could even be said that she was terrifyingly mature in private. However, she was still too young, and there would always be some things that she had not experienced or thought of. Just like now, she kept intentionally or unintentionally comparing second senior brother before her with her master and eldest senior brother, and then she got the impression that he seemed to be inferior. However, although his achievements were poor, he was still a good person. Zhuo treated White Lotus pretty well. He was probably the person who treated her the best on Winter Peak. White Lotus revealed a rare smile and nodded to Zhuxian. She thought to herself, this second senior brother really knows how to conduct himself. She quickly walked away. Zhuxian watched as White Lotus left, his eyes remaining gentle. From the beginning to the end, he saw the changes in White Lotus's expression, but it did not affect him too much. How many years had it been? How many people had intentionally or unintentionally looked down on him? This was very normal, wasn't it? Zhuxian could even guess what this little girl, White Lotus, was thinking. He knew that she did not do it on purpose. No matter who it was, after having a deity transformation stage master and a nascent soul Daoist master who was also the Kunlun sect leader's senior brother, everyone's expectations of him would become very high. It was so high that if they only cultivated to the level of Jean Dan Friar, it would be a kind of sin. The wind and snow blew from afar, and White Lotus's figure disappeared in the distance. The smile on Zhuxian's face slowly disappeared, and his expression gradually became indifferent. It looked like the wind and snow on this winter peak. It was cold and piercing. He quietly looked at this familiar white world. Every cliff, every icicle, every mountain path, and even every piece of wind and snow that had been blown by, felt so familiar to him. He had spent a long time here. He raised his head and looked at the violent wind and snow at the highest point of this mountain. That place seemed to be above the ninth heaven, as if it was always so high and unreachable. After a while, he suddenly laughed, with a hint of self-mockery. There were still many traces left behind from last night's stormy night. Under the hazy sky, the dark clouds gathered into a thick blanket, slowly rolling, as if they were brewing something. And on a nameless peak outside of Kunlun, a black shadow was slowly walking towards the highest peak. It was Black Dog. After a night, it seemed to have gone through another brutal battle. The bruises all over its body returned to its body. Fresh blood flowed continuously and dyed a large area of the ground red. But Atsu was not the most miserable. There were many more miserable than it, such as those who had fallen dead on both sides of the mountain path, or those who had rolled directly into the cliff and died. The air was filled with a murderous and bloody smell. Some heavy breathing sounds rose and fell, echoing in the shadows of this mountain. Behind Atsu, in the gaps between the grass and the trees, behind the branches and leaves of the forest, one could see some bright or murderous eyes everywhere. At the same time, in the area between these terrifying gazes and Atsu, near the mountain path, there was a scene of chaos. Blood flowed everywhere, flesh and bone fragments could be seen everywhere. It was like a feast of slaughter. Atsu's sharp teeth and the corners of its mouth were dripping with blood. The closer it was to the night of the full moon, the more power Atsu could feel in its body throbbing. It was like a wild volcano that was about to erupt and let out a terrible roar towards the world. It felt as if something was going to happen to it soon. However, the holy blood that flowed out of the tracking holy beast, as well as the numerous demonic beasts that were attracted by the strange blood fragrance, had already surrounded it excitedly. It was the most coveted delicacy in the world for holy beasts. It was a supreme treasure that could make holy beasts obtain great power and use it to advance. This was not a legend, but the instinct of all holy beasts. Therefore, when the terrifying and strange smell of blood spread out, all the demonic beasts within a radius of 100 miles went crazy. The boundary between life and death seemed to no longer be so important at this moment, and their instinctive desires seemed to have taken over. Do you want to stand out? Do you want to go to the top? These waves of hostility, like raging waves and raging tides, are desperately trying to pull you, drag you, hurt you, and murder you. Why can you do it, and why can't I? Eat your flesh, drink your blood, maybe I can too. Therefore, the wind and clouds gathered, and the world was covered in haze. Every step seemed to be accompanied by blood. The black dog had never felt so lonely before. Even when it was young and had followed that man, it had thought that all of this would never happen again. However, at this moment, when it looked up at the hazy sky and breathed in the eerie and terrifying cold wind, it finally understood. It was the only one on this road, and it could only walk alone. The black dog looked back, and its single eye was filled with a cruel light. The auras hidden in the shadows suddenly flinched, as if they were shocked by the ferocity. However, that was all they could do. Before the bloody feast, before the king had reached the top, who would give up on this blood feast? The cold wind blew, and Atsu suddenly thought of Lu Chen. Was that person still on that mountain? After this night of the full moon, would they still be able to see each other? Atsu did not know the answer to this question, and perhaps that person did not know either. It gently shook the remaining half of its tail. This scene suddenly looked a little tragic and comical in the midst of its ferocious and bloody aura. Then, it turned around once again. Even though it was a dog, it seemed to be looking down on the world. It ignored all the greedy gazes, the covetous gazes, and the bloody wounds on its body. Step by step, it faced the wind and walked toward the highest peak of the mountain. It looked forward to the arrival of the night. It looked forward to the appearance of the full moon. Two people stood on the towering city wall of Kunwa City and looked at the majestic Kunlun mountain range in the distance. They were Fan Tui and Chen He. Dark clouds hung low in the hazy sky, stacking on top of each other. Along with the waves of cold wind blowing from the mountain, this caused the world to have a murderous aura. The mountain was so tall that it was like a god. It stood proudly as if it was too high to be reached. Fan Tui and Chen He did not look good. They were a little gloomy. However, in comparison, Fan Tui's eyes were more ferocious, while Chen He was more composed. Amidst the cold wind, Chen He was the first to speak. Is the annual faction meeting of the Kunlun party being held on the mountain? Fan Tui nodded and said, yes. This is the most important event of the year for the Kunlun party. All the important figures will participate. As he spoke, he suddenly grunted and said, if a meteorite suddenly fell from the sky today, it would be able to subdue this damned faction. Even though the atmosphere was originally serious, Chen He, who was usually composed, could not help but laugh when he heard Fan Tui's words. He then shook his head and muttered to himself for a moment, in other words, today on the mountain of Kunlun is the day when the Kunlun party is most concentrated? Fan Tui replied, almost. Chen He asked, do you have any arrangements? Fan Tui was silent for a moment, then said, the enemy is strong, and we are weak. There is nothing we can do. We can only get our spies to watch carefully and not act rashly. Chen He nodded and said, that is also a wise move. He paused for a moment and looked at Fan Tui. Speaking of which, I suddenly have an idea recently. I would like to discuss it with you. Fan Tui said, please speak. Chen He said, the western continent is very vast, and there are many cultivation families. Even though the Kunlun party is very powerful, it seems that we do not need to focus most of our efforts here. What do you think? Fan Tui frowned and did not speak. Chen He smiled and said, even though we have suffered some setbacks previously, our foundations have not been damaged. It is better for us to develop in secret and endure for now. In the future, when the Holy Church recovers and becomes strong again, we can naturally find trouble with these people again. Fan Tui looked at the distant Kunlun mountain and suddenly said, but there is still a brother on the mountain that we have not contacted. That is a person who could set up the reincarnation array. How can we give up so easily? Chen He frowned and muttered, speaking of this, I have been thinking about this matter for the past 2 days. I have a feeling that this matter is a little strange. Chapter 222. Fan Tui was shocked and asked, what's strange? Chen He said, how many people in the Holy Church do you think can draw the reincarnation array? Fan Tui froze for a moment before replying, of course it's a senior with a high level of cultivation. At least 10 years ago, I heard that only the elders of the Holy Church could draw it. Chen He looked at him and said in a deep voice, you are right. That was indeed the case 10 years ago. However, the seniors in the Holy Church have withered. 4 of the 5 great elders of the past have passed away. Only Elder Ghost is left. However, it can't be him. Fan Tui's expression changed slightly. After a moment of silence, he furrowed his brows and said, "Perhaps it's a disciple left behind by the other elders? Or are they the experts that Elder Ghost has trained over the years?" Chen He shook his head and said, "That's impossible. I am well aware of the manpower of Elder Ghost. No one would come to Kunlun. As for the disciples left behind by the other 4 elders, there are naturally outstanding geniuses. However, they are also well-known people in the Holy Church. They are definitely not strangers who are hiding here and have cut off all ties with us." Fan Tui's brows furrowed even tighter. He said, "Based on what you said, this is indeed strange. However, the reincarnation array that appeared on Kunlun Mountain is undoubtedly the real deal from the various information we have received. However, if the person in the Holy Church who can draw this array is not here, how did this array appear?" Chen He's expression was dark. He raised his head and looked deeply at Kunlun Mountain, which was shrouded in dark clouds in the distance. Fan Tui continued to mumble beside him, "Could it be that such a high-level array formation has been leaked? If the person in the Holy Church who can really draw this array is not here, then no one in the world can set it up." "No." Suddenly, Chen He interrupted him. At that moment, his expression was suddenly filled with dark clouds. Even his eyes revealed a strong murderous intent. In this world, other than the few heroes in the Holy Church who can set up this array, there is another person with such ability outside of the Holy Church. Fan Tui was shocked and asked, "Who is it?" Chen He clenched his teeth tightly. A moment later, a cold gust of wind seemed to seep out from between his teeth. He said word by word, "A traitor." Clang, the melodious sound of the bell reverberated on the majestic Jianghu peak. Everyone in the Zhenyang Grand Hall turned around solemnly. The originally somewhat lively and noisy atmosphere quickly subsided, and the Grand Hall fell into silence. Suddenly he heard the sound of clothes fluttering. Someone was walking over. The bronze doors at the back of the main hall opened one by one, and a row of Daoist children came out in a single file, with a dragon embroidered on the left and a phoenix on the right. The iron cauldron was emitting green smoke, and the cloud board was emitting an auspicious sound. Cranes soared, beasts roared, and auspicious clouds appeared. There was a tall platform in the majestic main hall. Immortal energy floated about like floating clouds. A moment later, he sat on the main seat, nodded his head and smiled as he looked around. The cloud board rang out in succession. The sound was clear and melodious, each louder than the last, like the waves of a great river, each louder than the last. In a short moment, it actually had the momentum of a magnificent army surging forward. A gust of wind blew across the large hall, fluttering everyone's clothes. The hall was filled with heroes. It was as if the essence of 1,000 years of inheritance had been passed down here. It was the golden age of the human world. They couldn't help but feel a sense of heroism in their hearts. They felt that everything in the world was easy. There was nothing that they couldn't achieve. At the side, there were people singing and greeting, offering sacrifices to the ancestors, the sect, and thanking the heavens and the earth. The people in the seats looked up and saw that everyone was respectful. Looking further away, they also saw those extraordinary people sitting at a small table at the side of the hall. Reverend Idle Month's gaze swept over. Those Yuanyingzhenren who supported him also smiled and nodded. Everyone did not specially greet him. As long as he came, it had already explained everything. But the next moment, Reverend Idle Month suddenly frowned. He realized that he actually did not see Dukanzhenren in the crowd. His face slightly darkened, but he quickly relaxed. Dukanzhenren and he were not ordinary friends. All these years, everyone had supported each other. Reverend Idle Month completely did not think that Dukanzhenren would have any estrangement with him, let alone oppose him. Thinking about it, Dukanzhenren probably had some urgent matters to deal with at the Heavenly Soldier Hall. This was also okay. The big meeting during the day was originally glorious. The most important thing was the small meeting tonight. Presumably, at that time, junior brother Dukan would definitely not let him down. At least after so many years, he had never let him down. Reverend Idle Month was relieved, and just as he was about to retract his gaze, his eyes suddenly paused again. He saw that at the back of the crowd, there was a face that was not too familiar to him previously. Dongfang Tao stood at the small table and nodded at Reverend Idle Month from afar. His face was smiling, and his expression was natural. Reverend Idle Month stared at him for a moment, and a trace of a smile slowly floated on his lips. Then, he also smiled and nodded at Dongfang Tao, his eyes filled with gratification. Dukanjinren and he walked into the depths of the forest. The forest was deep, and the light was somewhat dim. Because of the rain 2 days ago, the ground in the forest had also become wet and soft, and some places were even covered in mud, looking very dirty. However, of course, these things would not be a problem for 2 cultivators with cultivation, especially since their cultivation was extremely high. One was the newly advanced Jin Dan Friar, and the other was Reverend Yuanying, who had been famous for many years. Drops of water dripped from the edges of the branches and leaves, and the soft sound seemed to make the forest seem even more quiet. Perhaps it was because the rain was too heavy, there were no traces of wild beasts in the vicinity, and even the occasional chirping of birds was rarely heard today. Light and shadow intertwined and changed on their faces, reflecting different expressions. It was as if black and white were constantly intertwining, walking in the light and darkness. The sound of footsteps could be heard as they stepped on the ground. Under the big tree, beside the big rock, in the rotten leaves and black mud, a small and inconspicuous branch trembled slightly. After a moment, the 2 figures appeared in this place. Dukanjinren looked around, his eyes sharp, and asked He, "Is this the place?" He took a step forward and said, "Yes." Dukanjinren nodded, took 2 steps forward and said, "Right now no one is here yet. Where is the place where you first discovered the evil sect talisman? Let me see." He nodded and said, "Teacher, please wait for a moment. I remember it is behind that big rock." After speaking, he strode towards that big rock. Dukanjinren stood where he was, turned and looked around. The surrounding forest was densely forested, far more than the outskirts of the forest. In the dim corners, shadows could be seen, as if there were always some strange gazes looking at this place in the darkness. Dukanjinren frowned, feeling somewhat unhappy. He thought, as expected, the evil sect's evil people were all cowardly and weak, even arranging to meet at these ghostly and shady places. It was really pitiful and laughable. And at this moment, not more than 3 chi away from his feet, under a few withered and rotten leaves, that tree branch stopped there, not moving at all. At this moment, He had already walked behind that big rock. Dukanjinren stood still and waited. That tree branch was like a dead object. Everything seemed to have frozen in that instant, as if time had stopped. Suddenly a breeze blew past, bringing with it a slight chill. "Ah!" Suddenly, a loud cry was heard from behind the big rock. It was He's voice, unusually tragic, with some traces of surprise. Dukanjinren's body shook, suddenly turned around and saw his most beloved disciple, He, staggering and retreating from behind the big rock, spitting out fresh blood, hoarsely shouted, "Mingzhu Shishu, why is this?" Dukanjinren's body shook again, while he was still in shock. Indeed, in front of He, a figure turned out from behind the big rock. It was a face that could not be more familiar. It was Mingzhu Jinren. At that moment, huge waves surged in Dukanjinren's heart. No matter what, he would never have thought. The one he waited for was an illustrious and famous person who was not any weaker than himself, Yuanying Jinren from the Kunlun party. Could it be that he was the evil sect spy? And without waiting for Dukanjinren to react, that Mingzhu Jinren's cold eyes swept over, also saw him. At that moment, Dukanjinren saw that Mingzhu Jinren's face suddenly revealed a shocked expression, followed by a trace of anger, shouted towards this side, "Dukong. It's actually you. So you are the evil sect spy." Hearing that, Dukanjinren was shocked. Just as he was about to open his mouth to explain, suddenly he heard the sound of the wind behind him. In an instant, as if the mountains were collapsing, the earth was cracking, the deep sea was raging, a few incomparably violent auras simultaneously rose from the depths of the forest, pressing towards him with a loud bang. Dukanjinren shouted, but did not turn around. Instead, he directly rushed forward. In front of him, Mingzhu Jinren's face was as calm as water. With a kick, he sent He flying, his sleeves fluttered, his whole body flew into the air. The surrounding spiritual light instantly condensed into a 10 feet light sword, directly chopping down. Wherever it passed, dust flew, trees fell, rocks cracked. Dukanjinren's eyes widened, his hands suddenly made a circle, a part of the cloud condensed into a shield, blocking in front of his body, only to hear a loud bang. That unstoppable light sword collided with the cloud's shield, an ear-piercing sound was heard. Immediately after, both turned into nothingness. At the same time, the raging aura behind him had already reached him. At this critical moment, Dukanjinren fully displayed the foundation of his many years of fame as a Yuanying enlightened master. His body shone brilliantly, and 3 magic treasures appeared one after another, turning into a pagoda, a bell, and a halberd. At this critical moment, he forcibly blocked the soul-chasing attack, flipped his body, and forcibly rushed out from the side. Even so, his chest was stuffy, and a mouthful of blood directly sprayed out from his chest. When he turned around, he saw 3 people walking out of the forest, causing his expression to greatly change. Impressively, it was Enlightened Master Qian Deng, Enlightened Master Guanyang, and Masato Kihara, the 3 great Yuanying enlightened masters. He saw Enlightened Master Qian Deng at the forefront, glaring at them and shouting, "Du Kong! You colluded with the evil sect to infiltrate our sect. This is truly a heinous crime. Why don't you surrender now?" Du Kong was aghast. "Preposterous, you are all slandering me." However, after all, he was not an ordinary person, and in a flash, he saw through the treacherous situation. He sneered, "You want to slander me, but don't even think about it. I will go find Senior Brother Sect Master to explain." With that said, his body moved, and he was about to fly into the sky. But at this moment, Enlightened Master Ming Zhu sneered, suddenly raised his hand, and struck He, who was already injured and leaning against a tree. Immediately, there was a frightening sound of bones breaking, and He staggered and struggled, blood spurting everywhere, and with tears in his eyes, he shouted to the sky, "Master, quickly leave." Dukanjinren, who was about to fly, suddenly stopped. Chapter 223. In Zhengyang Hall, everything was still proceeding in an orderly manner. At least during the day, there were still many tedious but important rituals that needed to be done one by one. They couldn't be careless when paying respect to the world and ancestors. As perfected Yuanying, he was naturally more relaxed than ordinary people. Most of the time, he only needed to stand to the side and watch. He only needed to bow and pay respects during the most important activities. Dongfang Tao had been doing it very calmly without any impatience. During this time, Melaleuca japonica took advantage of a gap when no one was paying attention to whisper to him, "Why are there fewer people than we expected from perfected Yuanying's side?" Dongfang Tao's expression didn't change as he replied softly, "Didn't I say long ago that this day isn't important? It's probably because those fellow Daoists can't be bothered to come." Melaleuca japonica shook her head and said, "I think something's wrong. Look, even Du Kong didn't come." Dongfang Tao glanced at her and said, "It's fine if you're talking about others, but I don't believe that old man Du Kong would be at odds with Idle Month." Melaleuca japonica thought for a moment and nodded. "You're right. Du Kong is indeed perfected sect master's loyal follower. He won't betray him. However, isn't this strange? If that's the case, why hasn't he come after so long?" Dongfang Tao said, "Something must have delayed him." Melaleuca japonica fell silent. Dongfang Tao waited for a while and saw that she didn't say anything. Instead, he looked at her and asked softly, "What's wrong? In the past, you've always been able to see through everything in the sect. Your senses are far sharper than mine. Otherwise, I wouldn't have always listened to you. Do you feel that something's wrong today?" Melaleuca japonica wanted to say something but hesitated. After hesitating for a moment, she whispered, "Actually, it's nothing. It looks good, but..." Hakushin Jinkuan released the news 2 days ago that he's coming today. Dongfang Tao was taken aback for a moment before he said, "That's right. Uncle Master Bai Chen wants to come and support his disciple, but he will definitely come at night." Melaleuca japonica glanced at him and asked, "Then why did you come here during the day?" Dongfang Tao smiled and said, "I'm doing this to show my sincerity to the sect leader, to show my sincerity." Before he finished speaking, his expression suddenly changed, as if he had thought of something. In order to show Jinren idle month and Hakushin Jinkuan, who was even more powerful, he came to support the Jinren during the day. This was a kind of attitude, a very clear and unambiguous attitude. But why didn't the others think of it? In the distance, perfected idle month finished paying her respects to the ancestral master. She retreated to the side and looked over through the gap. Dongfang Tao raised his eyes and looked over. Both of them smiled at each other and nodded. A moment later, perfected idle month looked away. The smile on Dongfang Tao's face slowly disappeared. A moment later, he said in a low voice, "It seems that something is really wrong." Boom. In the sky outside the main hall, the sound of thunder suddenly came from the gathering dark clouds. Dongfang Tao and Melaleuca Japonica raised their heads and looked outside. After a moment, Melaleuca Japonica said softly, "It seems like it's going to rain again." It started raining again. The rain was not heavy. In the beginning, there were only a few drops. Slowly, it became denser. However, it was still a light drizzle that drifted down from the clouds. It made the world and the towering Kunlun Mountains look a little blurry and hazy. The sound of thunder traveled into the darkness and into the shadows. Most people in this world, most of the time, felt that the darkness was scary, gloomy, terrifying, and disgusting. Very few people liked the darkness, just like how most people naturally like the light. However, there were also very few people who liked the darkness. They felt that the darkness was also warm. They felt that the darkness was a kind of protection. When they were lonely, they would think of it. For example, the legendary evil sect. Many people in the world felt that they naturally belonged to the darkness. This was of course a misunderstanding. As long as one was human, it was hard to change one's nature. Even for the evil sect people, most of them liked the light and hated the darkness. However, the Devil's sect of the Three Realms had such a long history that even the followers of the Devil's sect could not remember how long it had been. Since ancient times, they had actually passed down many unimaginable and bizarre Daoist arts and divine powers. Among them, there was an extremely rare and strange skill that made one hold his breath like a dead thing. Even the heartbeat almost stopped. As long as one's cultivation was deep enough, one could avoid the senses of some powerful cultivators. But the senses were still there. Therefore, in the deepest darkness, he seemed to have seen everything. It started to rain again. The water droplets seeped into the soil. That chill was like a knife piercing into the flesh and bone marrow. He had been waiting. Waiting for the figure that should have appeared. However, the one that should have appeared did not. The one that should not have appeared, came a lot. He could not even distinguish the layers of illusions in this chaotic situation. Therefore he could only hide in the darkness and wait in silence. Dukan Jinren's eyes widened in anger. He looked angrily at Ming Zhu. His teeth were clenched. Ming Zhu looked at him with a cold smile. He said disdainfully, "Evildoer." Du Kong looked at He, who was vomiting blood. He said with grief and indignation, "You and I are both Yuanying Jinren. You have the nerve to attack such a young man?" Ming Zhu sneered. "You put it nicely. If you have the guts, come and fight me for 300 rounds? Du Kong snorted. His face changed. In this treacherous situation, his many years of experience allowed him to maintain a clear mind. He said coldly, "I am not a spy from the evil sect. There is a misunderstanding. I will explain it to sect head's senior brother. If you guys dare to lay your hands on my disciple, be careful that I will be ruthless in the future." After saying that, he hardened his heart. Without looking at He turned around and left. With Jinren Yuanying's level of cultivation, it was easy to defeat him but hard to capture him. Killing him was even more difficult. The few Yuanying Jinren looked at each other. Suddenly, Qian Deng, who had not spoken since the beginning, took a step forward. He said in a deep voice, "Are you really not a spy from the evil sect?" "Bah." Dukanjinren said hatefully, I have been in the Kunlun party for many years. Don't you know what kind of person I am? Do I look like a spy from the evil sect? Qian Deng nodded slowly. He seemed to be moved by his words. He said in a deep voice, logically speaking, it is true. There must be a mistake somewhere. We also received a secret report from a spy who said that the spy from the evil sect would meet here. Dukanjinren was shocked. He quickly said, me too. Qian Deng frowned. So it is. It seems that there is a mistake. Shitty, return he to Dukong Shixiang. On the other side, Mingzhu shrugged. He picked up he and threw him toward Dukanjinren like a stone. Dukanjinren cried out in alarm. He subconsciously reached out to catch him. At the same time, he saw He's bleeding face. His heart ached. Very quickly, the sound of the wind swept past. He reached out to hold his most beloved disciple in his arms. In that split second, his body suddenly shook. His mind was suddenly in turmoil. He thought of something he had overlooked before. He learned about the evil sect spy's secret pattern from He. But where did He come from? Right, He said that he found it here. Why did Qian Deng, Mingzhu, and the others say that they discovered the evil sect spy's secret after learning about the secret pattern? How did they find the secret pattern? At this time, he should be in the Tian Kuan Peak's Jingyang Hall. Why did he come to this secluded and uninhabited mountain forest? And Qian Deng, Mingzhu, Guangyang, and Mu Yuan, these 4 Yuanyingjinren, also came here? Everything seemed to be a little off. His heart suddenly stopped beating, and he suddenly held his breath. A deep and frightening panic quietly attacked him, wrapping around his body. Dukanjinren didn't want to believe this cold premonition. But his reason coldly reminded him. He subconsciously loosened his grip on He. He wanted to step back, but at the same time, he saw his disciple's eyes. He's eyes were brimming with tears. He's face was filled with grief. Tears quickly flowed down. He's face was covered with tears. He's voice was hoarse. He softly called out, Master. Dukanjinren halted his steps. He suddenly felt a chill on his lower abdomen. Boom! At that moment, in the vault of heaven, a sudden clap of thunder resounded from the dark clouds. The sound shook the surroundings, as if to tear apart the vault of heaven and earth. Accompanied by the rumbling thunder, lightning like silver snakes swam in the dark clouds. The rain suddenly became heavier and began to rush into this gray and gloomy world. The heavy rain fell on Daoist Master Dukong's face, which seemed to have suddenly aged 10 years. As a result, many deep wrinkles that no one had noticed before appeared on his face. It was only now that people realized that this person was already an old man. An old man who had reached the end of his life and was about to die. 4 huge and dark figures slowly approached. They were the auras of 4 extremely powerful Yuanying enlightened masters. When they gathered together, their power was enough to split the mountains and split the earth. Just the invisible power seemed to have cut off any connection between this place and the outside world. Not even the slightest sound could be heard. But Dukanjinren no longer cared. He just looked at He in a daze. His mouth squirmed a few times. Then, he lowered his head to look at his lower abdomen. There was a bright blade there. It was as cold as snow. It directly cut through the incomparably tough flesh and skin of the Yuanying enlightened master like cutting a piece of paper. It went straight into the sea of qi in his lower abdomen and penetrated all the barriers. With a terrible and cruel aura, it directly pierced through the 5 elements disc in Dukanjinren's dantian. Like a demon, it ferociously nailed him to death on the blade. Then, it broke out of his body and along the way, it also cut off his spine. The blade had a handle. The handle was held in his disciple's hand. It was steady and powerful. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.